Hello Dingbats, I'm Kiki's Inner Monologue. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not new, why are you back? The last video had nothing to do with this. I've just gotten back from the bookstore. I got a whole bunch of very exciting books, several which I had been planning to buy. Disappearing Spoon is a book I read a long time ago and wanted in paperback. Same thing with Ice Pick Surgeon. Some things from my reading list. I'm happy to actually finally own, so I can read them, Gregor the Overlander, The Constant Rabbit, and Because Internet. And some things which I bought on impulse. I have Hold Fast by Blue Balliet, A Pinch of Magic by Michelle Harrison, which I was aware of but didn't know was 400 pages and serious, and Hollow Dolls by Marcy Kate Connolly. I also bought Kane's Jawbone, which I probably shouldn't have bought. Point being, right now is the perfect time to absolutely ruin my mood. Behold Michael Vey, The Prisoner of Cell 25. This is my original copy from when I bought this at a book fair when I was younger. It is one of the most pointless purchases of my entire life. And today I'd like to share with you where and why and how Michael Vey manages to be so bad. It's gonna be exciting. Since this is my first bad book review, as one might say, I'm going to set some ground rules which I'd like to abide by and stay true to throughout future bad book reviews, hopefully. Rule number 1 is no punching down. I'm not going to make fun of anybody who, for instance, didn't really make any money off their story or is self-publishing it. Basically what this means is I'm not going to review anybody's books who isn't putting themselves out there. A really good example of this is Eye of Argon by Jim Tice, which gets a lot of bad book reviews online, but Jim Tice did not ever make any money off of the story, and he published it himself in a sci-fi magazine and was very excited about it. For a long time, nobody even knew who wrote the story. I just don't think that kind of criticism is fair, and I'm not going to be hosting it on this channel. Number 2, for a similar reason, I want to focus on traditionally published books, because I feel like people can kind of write whatever they want and put it out there, and that's something that they're choosing to do if they're self-publishing. Whereas with Michael Vey, for example, one of the notable things is that not just the author, but a large number of editors and publishers and other people involved with the book publication process also read this and thought, yeah, I like this. So that's why these kinds of books are even more unbelievable and bizarre and interesting to me. So I'm gonna try and stick with traditionally published books, not because I don't think self-publishing is good, but because it's another example of something that I don't think would be fair to criticize. I will also try to focus on constructive criticism. I'm not here to make fun of this. I'd love to make fun of this. I also want to tell you why it's bad and what aspects of it are poorly done. After all, I'm here to review the book, not laugh at it. And my last rule is that I want to try not to do the same books that other reviewers have already done. You can go watch somebody else's analysis of Empress Teresa or Rin Tongue and Dorner or any of those other vaguely well-known terrible books that are readily available on the internet. What I want to do is add to the corpus of known bad books by sharing some of the things that I've had bad experiences with that you may not have heard of. So if you're not familiar with Michael Vey, that's great. This is going to be new and exciting for you, and I want to try and keep it that way. Alright, my script is 6 times longer than the one for the last video, and that was 3 hours long, so we better get started. Let's go. I'm going to be going through this whole thing in excruciating detail, so let's start with the start. The cover. First off, the title. This book is called The Prisoner of Cell 25, or Michael Vey, The Prisoner of Cell 25. I'm not really clear on whether Michael Vey is in the title. It's the name of the series, kind of like Percy Jackson and the Olympians is the name of the Percy Jackson series, but most people are going to call the first one either The Lightning Thief or Percy Jackson, not both. I bring this up now because there's a lot of weird Percy Jackson parallels in this book, and I think it was trying to kind of jump on that bandwagon, but it does a really bad job. Anyway, this title is The Prisoner of Cell 25, which really does not have that much to do with this book. Cell 25 is a relatively minor plot element that's briefly mentioned in the prologue to be a title drop and isn't mentioned again until chapter 45 of 48. So you can already tell this is not going to be that relevant to the story. Second off, I want to talk about the cover art a little bit. It isn't really a good representation of the main character, from what I understand. They seem to have put a glow effect around this character, and it's questionably done. You can kind of, if you look closely, you can see the compression artifacts on his head and his legs because of it. And I don't know where the character is meant to be. He also looks kind of tall and intimidating, but also blonde because of the glow effect on his head, and we don't actually know what color hair the main character has, but we do know that he's supposed to be short and not intimidating at all. It's a major plot point, so it's just weird choice for cover art. This book was written by a man named Richard Paul Evans, who is apparently a terrible person. He is generally known for writing something called The Christmas Box, which I am not familiar with, but which seems to have been popular enough to make his name, and he's written a lot of other things in Christian fiction, which seems strange given that this book is not religious, like, in the slightest at all. Richard Paul Evans is also known for harassing somebody at a sci-fi convention, and nobody will speak out about it because he's a popular author, even though this is the only thing that he's written that I've heard of, and it's shit, so I can't understand that at all. Anyway, I'm not supporting him. Like I said, this is my own old copy, and if I do end up reviewing other books in the series, which I might, we'll see, I'm going to buy them secondhand, so I'm not giving any money to this terrible person. This book is published jointly. I don't really understand publishing, but it seems to be affiliated with both Mercury Inc. and Simon Pulse, which are both imprints of Simon & Schuster. Mercury Inc. is associated with Glenn Beck, of all people, who I'm too young to know about, but apparently he was a conservative television host on Fox News, which is just very confusing to me because I don't understand why his publishing imprint would end up publishing this. Simon Pulse is also just another random imprint of Simon & Schuster that publishes kids' books. Even though pulsing is a mechanic in this book, it actually has nothing to do with that. It's just a weird coincidence. All right, let's look at the back. On the top, we have one of the opening lines. The story I'm about to tell you is strange, very strange. It's my story. Not necessarily a good representation of this book, I don't think, but that's up for debate. There are a couple of strange things about the back blurb in general. For one thing, Michael Vey is called a 14-year instead of a 14-year-old, and I legitimately can't think of any reason for it. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with the terminology of the book or anything. It's set in the normal world on Earth. Everyone is called something year old, so I don't see why he's being called a 14-year here. It's confusing. His friends are introduced in the second paragraph as his best friends Austin Liss and cheerleader Taylor Ridley. This is just not a very good description of either one of them, because first off, Austin deserves like something about him. His whole personality is that he's really smart, and Taylor should not be being introduced as a cheerleader because it's just a minor plot point in this book and has like nothing to do with her character or her story in the book. I mean, you could have introduced them as genius Austin Liss and mind reader Taylor Ridley, and it would have made 10 times the amount of sense. It's just confusing. There's also another bit. The three of them learn that there are other kids with similar powers and that someone or something is hunting them. Something is just a red herring. The foreshadowing goes nowhere. It's someone, it's somebody hunting them. I don't know what the something is about. The last paragraph. After his mother is kidnapped, Michael will have to rely on his wits, his unique power, and his friends to fight the hunters, find his mother, and save the others. This fails to mention that, like, the major plot of this book is that Taylor is also kidnapped, and the friends that he's relying on are the same ones who tried to pull his pants off and shove him into a locker upside down. I'm already giving spoilers for this book, and I hope you don't care, because if you came in here caring about spoilers, you should probably leave. but we'll see how this happens, and it doesn't make sense. Chapter 1, Chopsticks and Spiders. I know what this chapter title is supposed to be because I've read this several times, but if I did not know what this chapter was supposed to be, that is a really bad mental image. In this chapter, we are introduced to two characters, Hatch, who is the bad guy, and also another bad guy that I don't remember anything about because he's not relevant in this book at all. He's just there for Hatch to have telephone conversations with. We find out some important information. They are looking for two children and they would like to turn them evil. Also, they've already found 15 out of 17 of the children. We won't see all 17 of them in this book. There's actually like confusing retcon reasons for that I'll explain later on, but this is the foundation of what's going on in this chapter. Actually, when they say they have 15 out of 17 of the children, you find out later in the series that they only have 13 at this point. So it's very confusing that the book starts with "Have you found the last two?" instead of the last 4. I can't tell if Richard Paul Evans wanted to save that reveal for later and was willing to sacrifice sense for it, or if he just legitimately did not know about it at this point, but both of them are bad. We get an analogy on the first page, which is really indicative of the beginning of a lot of random racism against Asian Americans and Asian people in general, which absolutely persists through these books. It's honestly not particularly notable in this book unless you're looking for it, but I remember there being one of the later books where they go to China and it's just really bad. So wait for that, I guess, and I'm just keeping my eye on it for right now where it is already bad. We find out they're 2 children among a billion. Finding them is like finding a lost chopstick in China. We also find out that there's $1 million bounty on these 2 children, which never comes up again, by the way. It's just mentioned because it's the bad guys who find them themselves, not like they're bounty hunters. So this doesn't go anywhere. We also find out they have spiders crawling the web capitalized, and that they have like detectives that are looking in records everywhere to try to figure out where these children are. I don't understand how the bad guys don't know where these children are. It actually boggles the mind. Okay, there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one is that the evasive maneuvers that have been taken by these children and their families are like basically nothing. One of them moved states. The other one was adopted across states. That's it. They're both still in the US, in the same country where they were born, and they both go to regular high school. They're not hiding. They're in public records. Their names are in the school directory, and the bad guys already know their names. So it is very confusing to me that the bad guys have not found them. Adoption records can be bad, but they're not that bad, and the internet, even when this book was published in 2011, would have been a decent enough resource to at least find somebody who was related to them. You would think that at least would be possible, but I guess not. At the end of the chapter, on the next page, we find out that if the kids don't turn evil, then there's always cell 25, and we don't get any more elaboration about that. And then the chapter ends. It's less than a page long. This book has really short chapters, especially at the beginning, so we'll be seeing this kind of thing a lot. Chapter 2, The Beginning. This chapter has an even worse first line than the first one, because this is supposed to be the first line of the actual story featuring Michael. This first line isn't wrong, it's irrelevant, and also there's 2 first lines. Here's the beginning. It's not like I was looking for trouble. I didn't have to. At my height, it just always found me. My name is Michael Vey, and the story I'm about to tell you is strange. Very strange. It's my story. And thus we are introduced to Michael Vey, who is short. That's all we know about him so far, and that is actually all the physical description that we will get about Michael Vey in this entire book. He then proceeds to give us the most condescending intro I may have ever seen in a book in my life. If you passed me walking home from school, you probably wouldn't even notice me. That's because I'm just a kid like you. I go to school like you. I get bullied like you. Unlike you, I live in Idaho. Don't ask me what state Idaho is in. Newsflash, Idaho is a state. The fact that most people don't know where Idaho is exactly why my mother and I moved here, so people wouldn't find us. But that's part of my story. Besides living in Idaho, I'm different from you in other ways. For one, I have Tourette's syndrome. You probably know less about Tourette's syndrome than you do Idaho. Usually when you see someone on TV pretending to have Tourette's syndrome, they're shouting swear words or barking like a dog. Most of us with Tourette's don't do that. I mostly just blink my eyes a lot. If I'm really anxious, I'll also clear my throat or make a gulping noise. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes kids make fun of me. It's no picnic having Tourette's, but there are worse things that can happen to you, like having your dad die of a heart attack when you're 8. And that's the way that that's introduced. I want to talk about two things here, and that's Idaho and Tourette's syndrome. I found the Idaho bit extremely condescending when I first read this book, because newsflash, I'm from Idaho. The only reason I picked this book up is because I lived there, and if you live in Idaho, your Idaho literature choices are Walk Two Moons, Educated, or this. The school that Michael goes to in this book is where I took my SAT. So I know about Idaho, I am aware of Idaho, and I can point out all of the Idaho inaccuracies in this book. First one, that people don't know that Idaho is a state. Once I moved out of Idaho, I became exposed to a lot more diverse of a population, which includes a lot of people that aren't from the US, and a lot of them know that Idaho is a state. I don't think I've met almost anyone in the US who is not aware that Idaho is a state. That's why this is such a bad intro, because it already assumes that it's talking to the least knowledgeable 5% of people. If you're going to make assumptions about your reader in your book, which you shouldn't, they should not be on the reader is a blithering idiot side. And you also should probably not assume that the reader doesn't live in Idaho, because there's no reason to assume that, and it doesn't actually add anything to the story, and it just makes it more frustrating to read. Number 2, the Tourette's syndrome bit. I actually don't personally know anybody with Tourette's, so I really can't speak to how well it's executed. I do know that it's executed consistently throughout this book. I'm just wondering about the choice of introduction here, which is apparently that Michael has watched TV where people are pretending to have Tourette's syndrome and having ridiculous tics. I don't understand what TV Michael would have watched at age 14 that includes people pretending to have Tourette's syndrome and barking like a dog. It's just very confusing to me because I've never seen anything like that, and I definitely had not seen it before I was 14 or since. And once again, why is he assuming that the reader is making ableist judgments about him? It's not positive. It's not a positive way to start a story. I also don't want to diminish the representation of Michael having Tourette's syndrome, but knowing this book, I'm pretty sure this is a bit that's trying to be like Percy Jackson. In the Percy Jackson series, Percy has ADHD and dyslexia, and there are also plot reasons for that, and there are, one of the ways that the book does it really well is by showing that there are also strengths associated with that, and there are ways that those things can actually help him and protect him in being a half-blood. That's why it's done so well in the Percy Jackson series. Here, it's just a thing about Michael. And finally, we get to the end of the chapter. There's something else you don't know about me. It's my secret, something that scares people more than you would believe. That secret is the reason we moved to Idaho in the first place. But again, that's part of my story, so I might as well tell it to you. It's kind of weird that Michael mentions his secret scaring people. I just find that strange, given that he's generally been pretty good at keeping it a secret. But I don't know. We can see about that. Chapter 3. We find out that Michael goes to Meridian High School. He is in 9th grade, which he tells us is the armpit of life. He never actually goes anywhere with that. It's just a nice way to open the chapter, I guess. And he is currently in the principal's office. He has been shoved into a locker upside down by a bully named Jack Vrains. Remember that name. And he is now being interrogated about it for some reason by the principal, whose name is Mr. Dahlstrom. We spend the rest of the page finding out that the choir teacher has a crush on Mr. Dahlstrom. We spend the next page getting a spelling lesson about how principal is spelled and how Mr. Dahlstrom doesn't put the pal in principal. We find out it's the second time that month that Michael is in Mr. Dahlstrom's office for something he didn't do. And then Mr. Dahlstrom says, "It's the second time you've been in my office this month." And then Michael says that he doesn't like it when Mr. Dahlstrom asks questions he already knows the answers to. This is okay, I guess. Repeating information is just generally not a good thing, especially in quick succession in a story like this. But he's blaming it on the character here, which I can't tell if it's a clever way to get out of that or if it's just meant to be annoying to show that Michael is annoyed. But I think Michael should be more than annoyed at this point because he is being blamed for being shoved upside down in his own locker. We find out about the bully, Jack Vrains, who has a driver's license, a car, a mustache, and a tattoo. He is apparently like 17 and he's still in 9th grade because he's been held back so many times. He also has a gang, which is why you know you need to be worried. His gang is 2 other boys. One of them is named Wade and the other one is named Mitchell, and they also help him bully people for some reason. Jack's dream in life was to go fight in the octagon so that he could fight people for money. I kind of doubt that that would come up when he was shoving him in the locker, but I don't know how bullies act. I didn't go to high school. We get a paragraph for a joke about how Mr. Dahlstrom looks like Medusa because he has a death stare, and how Michael said in class that Medusa must be Mr. Dahlstrom's great-great-great-great-grandmother. And then Michael says, "I don't know why I said that, maybe it was my Tourette's syndrome." But apparently that got him on Mr. Dahlstrom's bad side, which is why he is now saying the things that he's saying. Mr. Dahlstrom is an awful educator because he tells Michael that he can't be shoved into a locker without his consent, and because Michael won't give him the bully's name because he's afraid of retaliation, Michael gets detention for 4 weeks and gets sent back to biology class. Mr. Dahlstrom is a terrible, cartoonishly evil educator, even for Idaho, where in my experience the educators are pretty bad. I find that difficult to believe, but I wouldn't know. Let's continue. Michael goes back to biology class, and we meet his best friend, Austin, who sits in front of him. Austin is really smart, and he also has a dumb mom. We find this out immediately, because we find out Austin was named after the city in Texas, but his name is actually spelled Ostin, because his mother didn't know how the name of the city was spelled. And I find that strange, because to my understanding, it normally says the name of the city on the birth certificate, so she could have just looked. And also, I don't understand how somebody cannot know how to spell the name of the city they live in. I don't know. It seems strange to me. And it seems strange to Michael, too, which is why Michael is immediately speculating about how Austin's mother is extremely stupid and he must be adopted because he's so smart. We also find out more about Austin's mom, who, may I remind you, is not here. She spoke with a Texan accent and called everyone honey, which may sound annoying, but it wasn't. She was always nice and kept a supply of red licorice in their pantry just because she knew I liked it and my mother didn't buy candy. Everyone in Idaho already says honey when they talk to people, and it is annoying. So I don't see why Austin's mother should stand out. Finally, we're back on about Austin, and we find out that he is fat, he is wider than his own locker. This trend will continue throughout the book, where Michael makes fun of and degrades his best and pretty much only friend, for no apparent reason other than character establishment, and it's really rude and uncomfortable. We meet another character, Taylor, who sits on Michael's left. Taylor is a cheerleader, and she's really, really pretty. She's one of the prettiest girls in any high school anywhere in the world. And of course, Michael and everyone else in the school have a crush on her, and she's very popular. but she doesn't have a boyfriend, and she doesn't even really have any friends. Like, later on when we see her talking to girls, she doesn't seem to be close with any of them, and in the rest of the series, when the other characters are thinking of, like, friends that they might visit and stuff like that, Taylor isn't a part of that. Taylor is completely alone. She's popular, she's universally well-loved, everyone thinks she's beautiful, but she doesn't have friends and she doesn't care about her family. That's Taylor. The teacher, Mr. Poulsen, starts asking the class some questions about electricity and how electricity works in the body. Nobody seems to be able to answer all that well. Taylor reminds the class and the reader that electricity signals nerves and thoughts in the brain, and the teacher asks where the electricity comes from. And nobody is able to answer until Austin raises his hand, sits up, and says, "The human body generates an electrical current through chemical concentrations in the nerves in a process called bioelectrogenesis. Whenever a nerve signal is sent, potassium ions flood out of nerve cells and sodium ions flood in. Both of these ions have slightly different charges, and so the difference in ionic concentrations inside and outside the nerve cell creates a charge which our bodies process as electricity." I talked in my last video a little bit about how particularly intelligent people are often stereotyped as assholes who are somehow being possessed by textbooks, and that was mostly a joke, but I'm actually serious here. Because Austin is a shallow, pretty unpleasant character who's obsessed with girls and dating and creeps on them all the time, but when he's smart, he just lists things. This isn't doing a good job of convincing me that the character is smart, but it's doing a good job of convincing me that the writing is bad. Also, I should mention, I recently read a book called The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons, which I really quite enjoyed, and one of the things that I learned in that book is that the electricity that gets the credit for transmitting thoughts actually is only being transmitted inside nerve cells, and it's ions that are able to cross the gap and send messages to the next nerve cell, and so on. So this is actually kind of a misleading interpretation. And the entire plot of the book is founded upon these details. So we're off to a great start. Chapter 4, The Cheerleader. Austin has clogging lessons, and Michael hates his best friend. We start with that. We start with Michael being physically repulsed by the idea of his friend dancing. I don't understand why Austin still hangs out with Michael. Well, I guess we find out in this chapter, but if so, he's even more shallow than the book establishes elsewhere. Remember, Michael has detention after school, so he goes to detention. He is still physically injured from being shoved in a locker the previous night. He has a scrape, and the bullies almost slammed his fingers in the door. I don't understand why the principal hates him so much that he's willing to ignore this random physical abuse that's apparently happening to him for no notable reason. On the next page, he leaves detention. He studies for a while, he leaves detention, and he's ambushed by the bullies outside. Jack Vrains calls Michael a chicken unironically and shoves him into a thorn bush. The bullies start punching him, and it seems pretty bad. Like, he gets a black eye, and one of them punches him in the chest, and he has trouble breathing, and he's groaning. He's having a bad time, but things get really bad when Wade threatens to pull his pants off, and then he starts begging. It's just when they threaten to pull his pants off that they start begging. This seems to be their specialty, and and Richard Paul Evans decides to include an explanation of what pantsing somebody means, which I don't think I need to explain why that's not necessary. But we also find out that Austin has also been pantsed, but it was in front of like 30 people, and he had to run home. He had to run all the way home without his pants, which doesn't seem like it's what's happening here, since it's just the bullies and Michael. And also suddenly Taylor is here, Taylor the cheerleader. The bullies continue to beat Michael up despite now having an additional witness. Oh, I forgot to mention that the reason they're beating him up is because they think that he told Dahlstrom about them beating him up, about them shoving him into his locker, but he didn't, and he's just coming out of detention, so they should recognize that he's the one who's been punished for that. It's just confusing. On the next page, they start tearing his shirt and smacking him in the face, and we get something interesting. Michael warns the bullies, and then, at that moment something snapped. I knew I couldn't hold back much longer. And a few paragraphs later, a surge of anger ran through my body, so powerful I couldn't control it. Suddenly, a sharp electric zap pierced the air, like the sound of ice being dropped onto a hot griddle. I don't actually know what that sounds like in retrospect. Is it electric? Electricity flashed, and Jack and his posse screamed out as they all fell to their backs and flopped about on the grass like fish on land. Michael has used his powers, which these are powers, to tase the bullies. This is another Percy Jackson parallel, if you're not aware of it already. Something that happens twice in the first Percy Jackson book before he even figures out that he has powers is bullies are bothering him and he gets really mad and attacks them with water. But both times it's by accident and he doesn't realize he's doing it. This feels a little different because Michael knows he's about to shock them and he doesn't try to stop himself from shocking them. He just like warns them and then they make fun of him more and then he goes through with it. It feels like he's using, even though he's being ganged up on here, it feels like he's using his powers strangely aggressively. It feels like he's using his powers not really for self-defense, but random aggression. And the reason that I get this feeling is because of what he chose to do. He could have just given them a little shock, but he gave them like a full taser shock. We find out in a bit that Michael can actually control how strong of a shock he gives. He's apparently not that good at it, but he's able to do it whenever he wants to. So I don't understand why he gave them a full taser shock that leaves them lying on the ground groaning, when he could have just given them a little shock so he could get up and get away. It seems kind of self-righteous and aggressive rather than in self-defense. It doesn't make me feel comfortable with Michael as a character. And we will see more of this further into the book, where Michael is perfectly capable of giving very strong, if not deadly, shocks to people that he classifies as bad guys, even if they're not even trying to hurt him. And not in self-defense, I'm talking random proactive murder. All the bullies fall on the ground and start groaning, and Michael says, "I told you to leave me alone. If you ever touch me again, I'll do worse. Do you understand, or do you want more? That was just a little one. Next time you bully me or any of my friends, I'll triple it." Feels uncomfortable. These are bullies. They're not evil. In fact, they become good guys later in the story. Also, he probably shouldn't be confirming that he did that because he's supposed to be hiding his powers. And he could just say that it was like an accident, like that I think there was another incident earlier on where he lied and said that they touched an electrical line or something like that. And especially if it was like a smaller shock, it could have come across as just like a weird accident. But no, he has to tase them and then admit it. I don't understand his logic. And then he remembers that Taylor was standing there the entire time. From the expression on her face, I could tell she had seen everything. We don't get to know what her expression is, but he gets really worried about his mom being upset and then he runs away. Chapter 5, Hiding the Evidence. Michael is at home, playing video games with one hand while he holds ice against his black eye. I just have to ask what video game he's playing that he can play with one hand. That seems like useful information, I guess. As soon as he hears his mom coming home, he runs and hides in his bed. His mother comes into his room and turns on the light and sees his torn shirt and his black eye and immediately guesses that bullies attacked him and he shocked their pants off. This is like a hint that this has happened before, and we find out later that yes, this has happened before. Michael asks, why won't they just leave me alone? And yeah, I'm wondering that too, because we don't know why the bullies started bothering him. In Percy Jackson, at least there's a reason for this, because he's already in a bunch of remedial schools where there are a lot of bullies statistically. But in Michael Vey, he's just short and has Tourette syndrome, which, you know, I understand how that could lead to, like, some bullying, but I don't understand how that could escalate to him getting shoved in a locker upside down. But that's just me. I haven't been to high school. That's it. Chapter 6, the morning after. Michael wakes up at 7:11 a.m. specifically. It's a weird detail, and we never find out why. We find out Michael feels guilty about his mom, but not about tasing the bullies. This whole thing feels like a really weird situation. Michael goes into the kitchen to get breakfast. We find out that his mom is a checker at the local grocery store, just like Percy Jackson, and she's a single mom, just like Percy Jackson, and he really likes her, just like Percy Jackson. She also gets kidnapped in this book, which is also just like Percy Jackson. There's so much stuff in this book, especially near the beginning. The setup is really similar, and it's weird. His mom is making breakfast. The sound of the spoon clinking against the glass filled the room. I know it's loud, but it's not that loud unless you're in Get Out. His mom offers to call the bully's parents, and Michael deflects it with some sarcasm and basically says that she shouldn't try. And then she asks if anyone else saw what happened, and Michael talks about Taylor, and his mom seems really worried about that. Then Austin shows up. We find out that Austin actually lives down the hall, which is why he's able to come over randomly in the morning. We also find out that Austin has a crush on Michael's mother, which is extremely uncomfortable. This detail will come up several more times throughout the story. And we find out that Austin knows about Michael's electricity, he's told him. And Austin wants to test Michael's electricity levels. We just found out about this, and only through like the situational detail of Michael having shocked the bullies. So this kind of comes out of nowhere. And also Austin wants to borrow a multimeter from his uncle, which is just a weird detail, because I feel like they could do it at school where there are generally multimeters available. Austin is also complaining about how his breakfast was gruel, and Michael doesn't know what gruel was, which just proves that when Michael is complaining about people not knowing where Idaho is, he's talking to his own demographic. This thing about gruel versus waffles is also weird, because Austin's mom is the one who keeps all the candy, and Michael's mom is the one who won't buy candy. So why shouldn't the breakfast choice be reversed, given the way that their personality has already been established? Austin starts asking random questions about whether people saw Michael shock the bullies, and whether Michael studied for the biology test, and when he has detention. And we find out that Austin didn't study for his biology test at all, which I know he's supposed to be smart, but that's a really bad idea. Everyone should study for their tests. I've learned this. It's genuinely very important, and I would think that he would know that if he's so smart. Michael's mom shows up again and calls him outside so that he can jumpstart her car, which I guess isn't creative use of his power, but she's very casual about it, and it's strange. Anyway, Michael shocks the battery, and we find out that when he shocks things, he calls it pulsing or surging. I don't know why he has two words for it, but they're used interchangeably throughout the rest of this book. Austin and Michael head to school. Michael mentions that Meridian High School is the fourth school that he's been to since they moved to Idaho 5 years ago. I think this is another attempted Percy Jackson reference, because one of the things about Percy Jackson is that he's been to a whole bunch of different schools because schools keep kicking him out. And so I think he's been to like 5 or 6 schools in 5 years. And it works for him because it's illustrative, but it doesn't work for Michael Vey, and here's why. Michael's in 9th grade, which means he's in his first year at Meridian High School. The year before that, presumably he would have been in junior high, because the school systems in Idaho there use junior high, not middle school. And 3 years prior to that, he would have been in 6th grade, which is elementary school. So we already know Michael has been to 3 schools just by virtue of how old he is. He's been to a high school, a middle school, he's been to a high school, a junior high, and an elementary school. I don't know what the 4th school is, but him having been kicked out of 1 school in 5 years is really much less indicative than Percy Jackson having been kicked out of 5. We get a little bit of backstory. When I was in the 6th grade at Churchill Junior High, a bunch of wrestlers put me in the lunchroom garbage can and rolled me across the cafeteria. Then he has details about what was in the garbage can. It took 5 minutes before I couldn't take it anymore and I went off, as my mother calls it. I have a couple questions. First off, there's no Churchill Junior High in Idaho, and he just told us that he's been living in Idaho for 5 years. So he would have been in Idaho when he was in the 6th grade. I don't understand why his high school is real, but his junior high is not. Second of all, junior high doesn't include 6th grade. That's the point of it. It's just 7th to 9th grade. I don't know if that's universal, but that's how it works in Idaho, so this makes even less sense. Third of all, are there wrestlers in 6th grade? Maybe there are, and I'm just not aware of it, but that just seems strange to me. Anyway, we also find out that Michael was bad at controlling it back then. Actually, he hospitalized somebody. Oh, and then I forgot about this, that a few months later his mom and him moved again, which once more I'm confused about since he's not supposed to have moved in the last 5 years, and this was definitely in the last 5 years, just timeline-wise. Oh, and then the chapter just ends without giving us any explanation of these confusing inconsistencies. Hi, I'm back. It's been almost a week and I need a bang trim more than ever. After everything that we just went through, we are now presented with a 17-page long chapter. The staggering inconsistency in chapter lengths will continue to reign in confusion throughout the rest of this book, but this is the first really long one. Michael is at school, he has a black eye. As he shares, everyone just stared at me, like I was a freak or something. I don't know. It seems reasonable that people are staring at him when he has a very noticeable black eye. It's a bad line. I don't know what to say. He is covering his face with the school newspaper, which is called the Meridian War Whoop, and I can confirm that schools in Idaho having racist mascots is not a Richard Paul Evans original. The Meridian Warriors are real. Some schools have started doing something about it, though, which I can appreciate. Michael goes to biology class, and Taylor asks him if he's okay, and he tries not to respond. And then the teacher shows up and starts handing out the tests. Granted, this was actually decent because we were told in the last chapter that there was going to be a biology test, so I can appreciate the bare minimum of consistency across chapters. Austin gets very excited about the test. I could see Austin squirming in front of me, happy as a pig in mud. He loved tests. Sometimes, for fun, he'd download them from the internet and quiz himself. Clearly something was wrong with him. This is meant to come across as sarcastic, but it doesn't come across as sarcastic just because of the way it's phrased. So instead, this is the beginning of many random derogatory jokes that Michael makes about his own best friend and the only person who will tolerate hanging out with him. I think maybe this is why Michael has no friends. Granted, he doesn't voice it to Austin, but it's absolutely there. Michael is having a hard time with the test when he gets a note from Taylor. She passes him a note saying, "How did you do that?" And instead of ignoring her, he writes on the note, "Do what?" and throws it back to her. So he's actually... He could just ignore her and it would make more sense. Taylor continues to pass him notes asking him what's going on, and Michael continues to, instead of ignoring her, passing the note back to tell her he doesn't know what she's talking about. And predictably, after about 6 times of this, they're caught by the biology teacher, who must have seen at least part of it, because apparently all he sees is that Michael is writing the note, but he could be just like writing on scrap paper, so he must have seen Taylor pass him the note a minute ago. But then Taylor says that she was the one passing notes, and this surprises Mr. Polson, the biology teacher. And then we find out that Mr. Polson probably also has a crush on Taylor, or at least Michael thinks he does. And dear God, because this man is old enough to be bald, it's really uncomfortable. Why is this here? That's my only question. Why is this here? Then something really weird happens. Mr. Polson completely forgets what was going on, or that they were passing notes at all, and things go on as usual. Michael knows something weird has happened, and he gets curious about Taylor. After class, Austin is excited about enjoying the test and doing well on the test. Michael calls him a freak out loud, which, if the events of this book didn't happen, I would hope would be the beginning of the end of their friendship. They're both terrible people, though, so I don't know if I care about what they decide to do with it eventually. Taylor confronts Michael, says, "We need to talk," and invites him to her house to come talk about it. Austin is excited during the entire interaction because he's excited that Michael is talking to Taylor at all because she's popular and pretty, apparently. Michael clearly wants to, but he says, "I have detention, I can't go," and she decides to wait for him in detention. So they go to that first. In detention, the teacher who's supervising it is wondering why Taylor was there, and because she's waiting for Michael, the teacher won't let them sit together so that she doesn't distract Michael, which enables another interaction to happen. Michael sits down near another guy and starts doing his algebra homework. And for no reason at all, this other guy, who is the same age as him but like a foot taller than him, starts throwing marbles at his head. Michael says, "Sometimes I felt like I was wearing a sign that said, 'Pick on me.'" Yeah, I feel like that too. Why is this boy throwing marbles at his head? There is no motive or reason whatsoever. They don't have any history together. He just has marbles and is throwing them at Michael's head when the teacher is just sitting there, supposed to be watching over the entire classroom. What is going on? Also, this boy unironically calls him Tickerhead, and Michael doesn't know what that means, which I guess is fine, but it just kind of comes across as cake sniffer. It kind of comes across as if it's meant to be silly and ridiculous. Anyway, this is an opportunity for us to get introduced to something else about Michael's power. There is a metal trim that runs along the wall. This other boy is leaning against the wall on the back two legs of his chair, and Michael, through the metal trim, has contact with his body, basically. So what we find out here is that Michael is able to pulse into something metal, and the shock will transmit to whatever else is on the other end of the metal. But I think he can pick what it is because presumably this metal trim goes around the entire room, and he is just picking to shock Cody. But that's not actually described, so I don't know for sure. Anyway, he touches the wall, and through the metal trim, he shocks this guy, and the teacher notices because the guy falls over. The teacher figures that he just fell over normally because she saw him leaning back on his chair, which is weird because at the same time he was leaning back on his chair, he was throwing marbles at Michael's head, and apparently she didn't see that because she doesn't say anything about that. Anyway, Taylor also saw this and knows that it was because of Michael for some reason. So, they finally get out of school and walk to Taylor's house, and once they get inside, instead of having the conversation that they came there to have, they start making small talk. Michael asks where Taylor's parents work, and we get the most normal human response ever to "Where do your parents work?" "My mom works for a travel agency that does educational tours for high school students. My father's a police officer." I don't know, I find this strange. Maybe because both my parents have complicated jobs, and I know too much about them to be able to sum them up in one sentence. But maybe Taylor is so popular that she just has to say this all the time to people. Even so, I don't understand this logic. Taylor asks Michael about Tourette syndrome because she sees him blinking, and she's also completely misinformed about Tourette syndrome at age 14. Tourette syndrome? You mean like those people who shout out swear words for no reason? Where are these kids getting this information? Taylor already knows what happened with the bullies. She saw what happened, basically the entire thing. But she asks Michael, what's going on with you? And he says, what did you see? And then she explains it again to him, despite the fact that they were both there. And Taylor starts talking about how her dad has a taser and a stun gun. Michael is weirdly hesitant to tell her, given, one, she saw the entire thing, so clearly she already knows and is going to be able to figure it out from the way that he's talking. Number two, he already told Austin about his powers, so keeping the secret can't be that important to him. And there was no particular, life or death reason to tell Austin either, he just felt like it. And number three, there's obviously something weird about her too. That's what we just found out, that's what happened in biology class. So it's strange to me that he's so hesitant. Maybe a little hesitant could be okay, but once he made the decision to go to her house, he basically already made the decision to tell her about his powers. Michael explains that he can shock people. And when he was a little kid, he would give people random shocks by accident, except it was hard, and it got bad, and it got really powerful. We get basically an interrogation scene that is questions being ping-ponged between Taylor and Michael that doesn't actually tell us anything new about Michael's powers. And I think this is a pretty good example of the dialogue in the book. And because this doesn't have dialogue tags at all, I'm gonna have to figure out a way to work around that. Let me see what I can do. Taylor set down her lemonade. So you can control it? Mostly. Sometimes it's hard. What does it feel like when you shock? To me or to them? She grinned. You. I can guess how it feels to them. It's like a sneeze. It just kind of builds up, then blows. Can you do it more than once? Yes, but I can only do it so many times before I start to lose energy. It takes a few minutes to build it up again. Do you have to touch someone to shock them? Yes, unless they're touching metal, like Cody was today. She nodded. That was actually pretty cool. Do you ever shock yourself? No. How come? I don't know. Electric eels don't shock themselves. I took another small sip of the lemonade and puckered. I also want to clarify that in using the lipstick, I'm not trying to reinforce stereotypes. I don't own any pom-poms for reasonable reasons, and lipstick was the only girly thing that I could think of. On the next page, we finally get to find out some information that we don't know yet, and it is actually very important. Taylor also has powers, as was briefly hinted at. Her powers are that she can reboot people. She can make them forget what they were talking about, basically, is the gist of it. She reboots them. It's kind of like they're waking up again. They don't remember what they were just doing. They kind of have to be reminded. And that's what happened to the biology teacher in class today. She rebooted him. She's also suddenly decided that this is also something to do with electricity. She says, I think it's an electric thing too. The brain is just a bunch of electrical signals. I can somehow scramble them. And it just strikes me that if you were able to do this, why would you associate it with electricity? It kind of seems like a mind powers thing, not an electricity thing. And that especially goes with what we find out pretty soon. It is reasonable to think about in retrospect when you find out that this book is themed around electricity, but Taylor doesn't know all the details of that yet. Anyway, they start having a conversation about how different and strange they are, and Taylor says, I don't think there's anyone else in the world like us. And that got me for a second. Because just because she's never heard of anyone else having powers absolutely does not mean that nobody else has powers. And especially, Taylor and Michael are two of 7 billion people who happen to meet. Most people do not meet in the world, so it's just extremely unlikely that if Michael and Taylor were the only 2 people with powers, that they would have met each other. That's all I'm saying. Even in the context of the book, it's extremely unlikely that Michael and Taylor met each other. There is no actual reason for this, it was just a weird coincidence. Anyway, we find out another little piece of exposition, which is that Michael and Taylor both glow in the dark a little bit. It's a bluish-greenish glow, apparently. And it's not super visible, but it is noticeable, like in complete darkness. We also find out that while Michael's mother and his best friend Austin both know about his powers, Nobody knows about Taylor's powers. Like, nobody, except for Michael now. Taylor has never told her parents. She's never told her brothers, who were just established. She's never told her friends. She's never told anybody. This is another good example of how Taylor doesn't actually have any friends, and throughout the rest of the series, she will never think about her friends. She will never consider having had friends. She's popular, but there's nobody that she likes spending time with, or trusts, or even thinks about regularly. It's very distinctive, and I find it interesting. Anyway, we find out that Taylor also has a second power, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure, I can't remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure she's the only person with powers in this whole series who has a second power, except for some stuff with Michael later on. Taylor's second power is that she can read minds. She has to be touching people's skin in order to do it, or touching metal that touches their skin. So when I said just a minute ago that my parents had complicated jobs, one example of that is that my mom used to work in neurofeedback therapy. This is a very specific field that you probably haven't heard of if you're not familiar with it, but I don't want to be like Michael Vey and assume that you don't know what it is. So it's possible that you do, in which case you're welcome to skip my explanation. But basically, this is a field that attempts to improve people's general thought processes by discouraging unhealthy brain waves, like the ones associated with exhaustion or lack of focus or that kind of thing. And what it does is the therapy patient, the client, will have an EEG put on, which is a method of measuring their brain waves, which involves putting a whole bunch of different electrodes on their head and hooking it up to a complicated computer system. And then their brain waves will get read by the EEG, and at the same time they'll be watching a movie or playing a video game that gets brighter or moves faster when they have more positive brain waves, and it essentially encourages them to be in a healthier space of mind in a quite literal scientific way. This has given me a little bit more insight into how weird Taylor's mind-reading power is, because there is such a simple way to make it more realistic. You can just have Taylor be an empath. The electroencephalograph that is used in neurofeedback therapy can only read the brain waves of somebody and in what frequencies those brain waves are, which isn't correlated to emotions. It's correlated to what your thought processes are like. I can't really explain it, but there are certain waves that are associated with like healthy, normal thought patterns. There are some that are associated with sleep, which you shouldn't really have when you're awake, and there are some that are associated with like a high level of concentration, that kind of thing. So if Taylor could touch people and in the manner of an EEG machine be able to tell what their thought process is like, it could be an interesting power and it would be more realistic. But the fact that she's able to completely read minds, like no cap whatsoever, she can literally guess random numbers that people are thinking when she reads their mind, it feels unrealistic to me. And not only does it feel unrealistic, it feels like a waste of what could have been a good concept. That's all I'm going to say about that. Once Michael and Taylor have told each other about their powers, their immediate conclusion is, not why do we have powers, not what's going on, it's weird that we met each other. No, it's we should start a club. So they decide to start a club. They promise never to reveal each other's powers to anybody. Michael says Austin should be in the club because he's smart, like mad scientist smart. That's a direct quote. And Taylor agrees that he can be in the club. Then they try and come up with a name for the club, and it falls so flat. Taylor's idea is the Power Team. Michael's idea is the Electric Eels. Taylor insults Electric Eels and then tells Michael he can call himself Eel Man. And Michael doesn't like that, but says that Taylor can call herself the Human Reset Button. It literally does keep getting worse and worse, and they decide to stick with their real name and just skip on making a name for the club until Austin comes up with one. And Austin does indeed manage to come up with a dumb name. But seriously, this is worse than Mysterious Benedict Society, and in there it's meant to be a joke. In here it's played completely straight. Taylor tells Basketball that he can come to the basketball game. I called Michael Basketball. What is this? Taylor tells Michael that he should come to the basketball game the next day, and Michael isn't really interested, but Taylor's asking him to, so he pretends to be interested, and he ends up going to the game. It turns out that Michael's birthday is on Saturday in 2 days, but Taylor's birthday is on Sunday in 3 days. And that's a weird coincidence, and to their credit, they both notice that it's a weird coincidence. But then we get a weird throwaway line that I didn't notice during my first read-through of this book, but is extremely strange in retrospect. Michael has never thought about why he has powers. In his entire life, Michael has never once wondered or considered why he has powers. It just hasn't occurred to his mind. I feel like that would be the first question that I would ask if that was me, but maybe I just ask too many questions for my own good. It's possible. Michael says he was born in Pasadena, California, and it turns out Taylor doesn't know where she was born because she was adopted, which is both a relevant piece of information and a plot device. Michael goes home. He's very excited to be in a club with Taylor because he still is more interested in having a crush on her than in finding out why they both have superpowers. I don't know if that's 14-year-old boy priorities or Richard Paul Evans being an idiot, but dear God. Yeah, I'm cracking this open over the book. I don't care. Michael gets back to his apartment building and knocks on Austin's door, and Austin is upset with Michael for meeting with Taylor, for spending time with anybody else. And Austin also immediately concludes that they had just made out or had some kind of relationship, despite Austin knowing that Taylor saw the shock happen, and also it being absolutely ridiculous that Taylor would decide to kiss Michael after one day. It's not ridiculous for Michael because I think he would totally do that if he thought it was okay. Austin gets a multimeter and a notepad and pen, and they both go to Michael's apartment so that they can start their tests. It seems to me like Michael has probably never seen a multimeter before from the way it's described, but it could just be exposition in a way that Michael thinks the reader is stupid. It's also weird to me because multimeters are very commonplace in both middle school and high school physics. They're an important tool that's just very regularly used in electricity units, so I don't know why he wouldn't have seen it before. Austin checked the barometer. We don't know which barometer. I just find that phrasing funny, to make sure that the air pressure was normal for some reason. And we get one of the dumbest science misunderstandings in this entire book, which is saying a lot. This multimeter, for some reason, has alligator clips on the ends. I don't know why. In most circumstances that I've seen alligator clips, you can take them right off. So, you know, if Austin wanted to, he could have just taken off the alligator clips or switched out the cables for ones that didn't have built-in alligator clips. Anyway, Michael is upset about the alligator clips because they look sharp and he doesn't want to clip them onto his fingers, which is reasonable. Having an alligator clip clipped onto your finger is mildly uncomfortable. I don't know why he would care. Instead of just holding them, where he can still shock them because they're still made of metal, he has to clamp them around his fingers for some reason. Michael surges, and we find out how strong his electricity is at maximum. It is 864 volts, which Austin tells him he could paralyze a crocodile with that, which is very useful information. Also, he could kill someone. And the way that Austin says that bothers Michael. Austin is never shown to be bloodthirsty. Many, many flaws, but never that. Michael is never shown to be not okay with killing people. Many, many flaws, but never that. So this is just a weird interaction altogether. Maybe Austin is saying it in a way that it's bad, and the fact that Austin doesn't like the idea is bothering Michael. I don't know. We don't get to find out the way that Austin said that bothers him. At just that moment that they're having that interaction, Michael's mom shows up, Austin hides the multimeter behind his back, and she immediately makes him show what it is. She sees the multimeter, recognizes a multimeter, like most people who have had middle school or high school physics would, immediately guesses that Austin knows about Michael's electricity and kicks him out of the house. Like, he just has to leave the apartment immediately. And once again, Michael hates his friend. Austin leaves because Michael's mom tells him to leave, and Michael thinks, "Run, you wuss." What is this for? Why are they both terrible people? Michael and his mother sit next to each other in silence, and she reminds him that she hated moving away from California to come to a new city so that no one would find out about Michael. It's implied here that they only moved once, that they moved from California to Idaho, which once again, they moved to Idaho 5 years ago, but also they moved somewhere 3 years ago. But also Michael was only in California until he was 7 or 8, and he's 14 now. So I don't know what the hell this timeline is supposed to be, but it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Anyway, we also find out something extremely stupid about this, which is that his mother worked at a law firm in California, and the way that she says it, she has a job at a law firm, so presumably she was a partner, or at least some kind of legal assistant or something like that, which is a valuable skill set, and which, if she was a lawyer in California, would be just as valuable, if not more so, in Idaho, in Meridian, Idaho. Why did she get a job as a checker at a supermarket when she worked at a law firm? This makes no sense to me. Also, she's blaming Michael for leaving her job when, like, you were the one who decided to be a checker at a supermarket. I don't want to blame people for having low-paying jobs, but this woman has credentials that she should have been using. Anyway, Michael confesses to telling Austin and also Taylor about his powers, and his mom gets upset with him and says that they might have to move again. And she says she's really tired and she doesn't know if she can do it. And so it's kind of implied here that they've moved multiple times. I'm so confused. Anyway, on the next page, we get this bit of dialogue. Austin is the only friend I have. He doesn't care about my Tourette's or my electricity. He just likes me for me. Everything we've seen so far has clearly indicated Michael does not like Austin. Michael makes fun of Austin. Michael bothers Austin all the time and thinks of him as a freak. Austin is only interested in Michael because of his electricity. So yes, he does care about Michael's electricity. That's kind of what their friendship has appeared to have been built on at this point. It doesn't seem right to me. And Michael is upset enough that he starts guilt-tripping his mom with the time that he got bullied at summer camp when they all called him a freak because he had Tourette syndrome, which is terrible. But I don't know why he didn't tell his mom about it. He says it was because she had enough to worry about, but then why is he telling her about it now? Because it's not at all relevant to what they were just talking about. Michael's mom also has a quote here about morality, which actually fits surprisingly well with the general morality of the rest of this book. This is perfect for Michael having tased 3 children on purpose. I was wrong when I said that it doesn't matter what you meant to do. Sometimes we can't know what's right. We can only know that we meant to do the right thing and that we had the right reason for tasing 3 children on purpose. By the way, that is about the context. Michael is saying he's tired of being bullied, and she's like, as long as you meant to do the right thing, when you hurt them and threatened them to make them stop bothering you, it's okay, it's good. And all of a sudden, after saying this absolute nonsense, his mother is in a funny, lighthearted mood. She says she's sorry for getting mad at Michael, and that she's glad that he told Austin about his powers because people shouldn't keep secrets from their best friends. Then she starts asking about Taylor. Michael says, I think she's like me. And his mother smiles and says, she likes you? What? She was just scared. She was just mad. She was just worried. Why does she suddenly only care about her son's love life? Anyway, Michael gives away Taylor's secret on this page, despite literally promising to never do that in his entire life in the last chapter. As long as Michael meant to do the right thing, it's fine. After Michael tells his mom that Taylor has powers, she makes a little comment under her breath. The comment is, "He said there might be others." And then she immediately denies having said this, and Michael never asks her about it again, over the course of the entire series. But it very clearly shows that Michael's mom knows more than she's letting on. Something that is not expanded on for a long time. But she does. She does know more than she's letting on. She knows more about everybody in this book who has powers. Immediately after that, we're on this fluff train again. Michael's mom asks if Taylor is cute. Austin and Michael are going to Baskin-Robbins to get ice cream again because his mom is happy now. This makes perfect sense. Chapter 9, A New Crowd. Michael is at lunch with Austin. It was pizza day, and Austin has gotten an extra slice, and I need to ask questions. What does Michael mean, extra slice? Is there like some set number of slices that they're supposed to be allowed to have, and in which case, how did Austin get an extra slice in the first place? Did everybody get one slice and Austin got two, in which case that's totally normal? I eat 2 slices of pizza whenever I go get pizza, and everyone I know does the same. Why do we need to reinforce this so much? Why is it so important that Austin is always eating more food than anyone else, even when it doesn't make sense or is poorly described? Why does Austin have cavities? Because we find this out immediately. And that has more to do with oral hygiene than how much you're eating, so what is this about? I mean, to be fair, we find out that Michael also has cavities, so I guess maybe it's not anything to do with that. But I'm worried about both of their oral health now. Michael announces that him and Austin are going to be starting a club with Taylor. And Michael hints that Taylor has powers. And Austin completely misses the hint and makes jokes about Taylor being hot. It's amazing in stories like this to always have a smart character whose character weakness is that he's stupid. I hate it so much, it causes me physical pain. Look, there are a lot of really dumb stereotypes about intelligent people, but at least this one is funny in the way it's bad, so I suppose I can tolerate it. You can have a character built this way, but it kind of only works with street smarts, where a character is either book smart but not street smart, or vice versa. The Keeper series, my favorite series of books by Ted Sanders, is a decent example of this. Horace is book smart, Chloe is street smart, but those are also very simplified ways of describing their characters. And you could probably find a better example if you wanted to, but that's just the one that I thought of off the top of my head. Austin immediately reinforces this dumb series of stereotypes by calling his head a computer. He'll put his computer on it, apparently, trying to come up with a name of the club. The computer clearly does not function given the club name that he comes up with. A cheerleader comes over to the table and asks to borrow a chair, and Austin gets really excited about it, and he yells after her, "Anytime, babe! Come back if you need another one. Got plenty of them. I'm your chair connection." Did you see that? She spoke to me. I hate this guy so much. Why does he exist? Also, Michael immediately makes fun of him because, once again, Michael hates Austin, and they're both terrible friends. Anyway, we finally get another, not answer, but another question as to the moving situation. Michael's mother is afraid that somebody will find out about him. That's why they moved from California and their last apartment. That's right. Michael moved all the way across town to hide from the bad guys, because whoever Michael's mom is worried about is a totally serious threat. Taylor walks across to come sit at Michael's table and sits down and forgets what Austin's name is, but immediately before they can talk, 2 of Taylor's friends who are guys come over to the table and sit down next to her and introduce themselves. We find out once again that Taylor just feels comfortable randomly lying to the people that she's supposed to be friends with and sit with because she doesn't have any real friends. They recognize Michael as the kid who kicked Jack's butt. I don't know how this information got out. Obviously, Jack and his friends would never tell anybody that they got bested. They're bullies, they wouldn't share that kind of information. Michael hasn't told anyone. So the only other person who saw this happen was Taylor, which means she must have been sharing with people, and I don't understand why, because they had just promised to keep this kind of thing secret. Drew, who's one of Taylor's friends, identifies Michael as the guy who beat up Jack, and Taylor confirms that Michael did in fact beat up Jack and his two goons, and that Michael has a black belt. Taylor's friend is very impressed and says to Michael, "Dude, you're legend." Then he takes one of Austin's pieces of pizza for no reason whatsoever. He could have just gotten his own. This could be used to highlight kind of how uncomfortable they are with Taylor's friends and how terrible Taylor's friends are, but it's not really, it's just a one-note thing. Because Austin is happy because Taylor is sitting at his table, and a minute later, 2 more cheerleaders come to sit at their table. Maddie, one of the cheerleaders, asks Michael why he's blinking, and Taylor says that he has Tourette's syndrome. And Drew, the guy who stole Austin's pizza, asks if it's contagious, proving that everybody in this entire world of Michael Vey is misinformed about Tourette's syndrome somehow. The bell rings and everybody leaves, and Michael tells Taylor that he's not used to hanging out with the popular people. And Taylor says that they're no different than anyone else, which is clearly untrue because they just randomly decided to sit at somebody else's table with no provocation, and they were being weird about Michael having Tourette's syndrome, and Taylor lied to them, so she doesn't trust them, obviously, and they stole Austin's food for no reason whatsoever. Michael brings up the lie, which I think is a reasonable thing to bring up at this point, and Taylor says she didn't technically lie because Michael is wearing a belt that's black. Just outside the cafeteria, Michael and Austin meet up to go walk to class, and we get potentially the worst line in the entire book, unsurprisingly from Austin. Austin is sure that Taylor has a crush on Michael, and he thinks she probably doesn't, and Austin says, "Are you blind? That hottie's got the hots for you, and she is H-O-T hot." My brain hurts just remembering that that exists. After school, detention has been canceled because of the basketball game, so Michael leaves to go walk home, and the bullies are waiting for him outside the doors. And immediately, they ask how he electrocuted them, and Michael threatens them and tells them to go to the principal and confess to shoving him in the locker upside down and causing him to have detention for a month. He's happy about scaring them, which at this point is reasonable, but it also kind of damages the possibility of them ever having a good relationship, which is weird because it's a necessary plot point for this story. On the next page, Michael gets home, but he's only going to be there for a couple hours because he's eventually going to go to the basketball game and then a party that Taylor has invited him to. We find out that Michael has spent every Friday night with his mother for the last 5 years. He hasn't spent a single Friday night with a friend in 5 years, and that includes Austin, who is supposed to be his only friend. So when do they hang out? And what is Michael doing with his mother on Friday nights that is so important? Of course, then we find the answer. Michael loves his mother. Direct quote. "I love my mother." You know in Percy Jackson, how he spends the first bit establishing how cool his mother is, and then how later throughout the story we find out important details about her, like how she married the guy that she hates being with in order to protect him, and we find out through small things about her personality how comfortable and fun and cool she is. That's well established. Michael Vey loves his mother. And that is how that's established. Michael goes to the basketball game. Michael hates his friend. Austin looked as out of place as a Twinkie in a salad bar. At halftime, Taylor comes over to their side of the auditorium and walks to the end of their bench to start talking to a guy named Tim Wadsworth, who The way that he is described, I can only think of as the two-faced creep from Monster Seeking Monster. He had perfect skin, golden hair with a soft curl, straight teeth, and a body that would make a Greek Olympic statue envious. Anyway, Taylor takes a drink from his cup, and Michael immediately sees red and gets extremely angry and possessive about a girl that he's basically known for 2 days. He surges onto the metal bleachers, and all 20 people who are sitting on the bleachers get shocked hard. Austin knows that it's because of him, and he gets upset. And it's actually kind of innocent for Austin. He asks, "Why'd you do that? That really hurt." Taylor walks up to Michael and gets upset that he was drawing attention to himself by using his powers. Michael makes a sarcastic comment about Tim Wadsworth, who's the guy that Taylor drank from his cup. And Taylor realizes that Michael was jealous, and instead of getting even angrier that Michael shocked 20 people because he was jealous that Taylor was talking to someone else after knowing her for 2 days, like a psychopath, Taylor sympathizes with him. She hugs him. We get a certain line, "I couldn't believe she had gone so quickly from wanting to hit me to wanting to hug me. But I didn't really understand girls at all. I just went along with it." You know why? Because women won't do this. Women won't act like this. Nobody will act like this. This is how Richard Paul Evans thinks women will act, and it makes no sense, and his character is here realizing that. I really hate the "I don't know how girls work" trope, because it reinforces this idea that women are impossible to understand and don't want things for normal human reasons like everybody else. But I hate it 10 times more when it's put in a scenario where no person would act in the way that the character is acting. This is abysmal. And this is the start of just Michael and Taylor together being really uncomfortable. It turns out that Taylor is still being kind of subversive, because she did think that he was jealous, but she wanted to make sure, which is why she hugged him, so that she could read his mind and literally be able to psychically tell exactly how weird and possessive he was being, so that she could be okay with it. But she still thinks it's funny. She's still fine with it. And she still thinks it was funny that Tim Wadsworth had coke dripping from his hair. Then she goes back to cheer for the rest of the game and tells Michael that he's a lot cuter than Tim Wadsworth. Okay. Once again, we have no idea what Michael looks like, so I don't know how this could be reinforced, but Michael says it's the greatest moment of his life. So if that is the greatest moment of his life, I honestly feel so much anger and pity about that I can't stand to take it away from him. Jesus Christ, there are 53 more pages left in part 1. I need a break. Hi there! I actually almost lost the will to record because I was so tired of Michael Vey. But we're going to give this another try, and hopefully I can get my brain to function, even though I'm exposed to this kind of thing. Chapter 10, A Suspicious Coincidence. I'd completely forgotten how bad these chapter titles are. They will continue to be bad. This is not the worst example at all. We are still at the basketball game. It's ending, and the other team's best player misses some free throws, so Meridian High School ends up winning the game. Everyone gets really excited about that. Austin and Michael go outside, and Taylor and a bunch of her friends are around. Taylor knows this girl named Angel, whose dad is going to take them to Maddie's house where the party is. It turns out that Angel is Asian American. And this happens. Angel was a pretty Asian girl, and Austin just stared at her until it was embarrassing. Finally, she stopped and turned to him. "What?" "Austin," he said, putting out his hand to shake. She looked at his hand, then slowly put out her own. "I'm Angel." "Are you Chinese or Japanese?" Her brow furrowed. "Chinese." "Were you born in China?" "Yes." He nodded. What brought your parents to America? Opportunity? Freedom of speech? My parents are American, she said. I was adopted. Oh, you're adopted. I wanted to smack him. Sorry, Angel, I said. Austin doesn't get out much. Hardly ever, he said. She shook her head. It's okay. And I think you're the prettiest girl in the world, Austin blurted out. Enough, I said to him. Angel smiled. What? Once again, Richard Paul Evans seems to think that women like being randomly harassed. Just an extremely disturbing and unnecessary series of questions. When I meet somebody new, I really want to immediately be asked about my race. What is this? What is this? This is probably the worst example of the racism in this book, which I know compared to like some of the other things that I could be reviewing seems pretty tame, but it gets so much worse, especially in book 4. I remember book 4 being really bad, so we'll see if I ever do that. Moving on from that, we end up at Maddie's house, which is on a long street which is called Walker Lane, and it's kind of unrealistic. See, Maddie goes to Meridian High, and Meridian is a suburb of Boise, which is the capital of Idaho. Meridian is just generally kind of a newer city, so rich people in Meridian tend to live in like developments and McMansions and that kind of thing. There aren't like the old wooded streets where all the people live. Those are in Boise. The way that this is described reminds me way more of Harrison Boulevard or Warm Springs, which people who go to Meridian High would not live on either of those two streets. It's way too far to drive. Also, her house has an indoor swimming pool. I have never heard of anyone having an indoor swimming pool at all in Idaho. It's just a weird detail. I don't understand where this is, and I should be able to since I lived there for many years of my life. There is actually a real street called Walker Lane, which is in that general area, but it's in Kuna, which is several miles away, and it's a tiny street, not big enough for what's being described here. They get to the party, and Maddie says hi to Taylor. The girls hugged. They did a lot of that. And yet, Taylor doesn't really seem to think of Maddie as a friend, or even think about her very much at all. So I don't know what they're hugging for. Austin gets inside, he sees the table of food, he says hold the phone. Taylor has no idea what hold the phone means, which is a weird detail, and Michael has to explain it to her. And then both Michael and Taylor make fun of Austin for being excited about the food at the party. If I'd just been to a basketball game, I'd also be excited to eat food at a party. Basketball games are long and I'm not very interested in them, and it doesn't sound like Austin is either. I don't like Austin by any means, but a lot of the situations where he's made fun of for being overweight or for being excited about eating food are just very normal things to do. And it's really uncomfortable regardless of the situation anyway. This is a high school party. There are a bunch of cheerleaders there, there are basketball players, there are all different types of people, and yet their drinks are a nice cooler with soda and water. I would have thought it would be a punch bowl, but what do I know? Michael is talking to some of the basketball players, and we get this line. Living alone with Mom, I had never engaged in small talk about sports, so I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. Well, you know what they say about being lucky. Drew looked stumped. No, what do they say? It's better to be lucky than good. And he's really impressed by this. I've never heard this in my life. I don't know what it's meant to be about, and I don't even think it's true. So what is this about? People continue to not know what Austin's name is. This is the second time this has happened in the book, and it will kind of be a running joke. The basketball players are calling him Houston just because they associate his name with Texas, which makes sense, I guess, but I don't know. I just never have associated the name Austin with Texas off the top of my head. I know it's the name of a city there, but it's also a name. We get introduced to a new character who is introduced in the most memorable and disgusting way in this book. Just then, a mountain of flesh named Corky walked up behind Drew. Corky was the size of a small planet and had an entourage of girls who moved around him like satellites. Corky is a wrestler. Once again, we have a wrestler being put up against Michael in a weird situation. Drew, who's the basketball player Michael was just talking to, claims to be Michael's friend and basically decides that he wants to see Michael and Corky fight and starts setting it up at a party. People actually get excited about this. Taylor shows up and Drew explains to her, Corky wants to engage the little dude in hand-to-hand, called him out. Taylor doesn't understand at all what this means. She continues to not understand basic English euphemisms, but she's also into it as well and starts deciding to referee it, including putting real money on this fight, saying that whoever loses has to do the winner favors, making Chuck Norris jokes about Michael. And it turns out, to her incredible surprise, that raising the stakes of this fight does not actually make people less interested in it at all. Like, if she wanted to fix this problem so that Michael didn't have to fight this guy, she could have just rebooted the basketball player. Probably nobody would have even noticed because it seems like all of his friends also hate him and think he's stupid. Anyway, the fight gets started thanks to Taylor's pointless encouragement. And she sets it up so that she is sure Michael can win, and she does this by telling Michael to run into Corky as hard as he can and rebooting Corky at the correct moment to make him fall over. And despite this demonstrably not being karate, everyone is really impressed by his amazing karate skills. So after this lovely interaction, Michael, Taylor, and Austin leave and go upstairs into a bedroom. Michael reveals to Austin that Taylor has powers. Remember, he promised to never reveal this to anyone, and just Austin being in the club does not necessarily mean that Taylor would feel comfortable with telling him. She didn't say that. And she doesn't even react when Michael is explaining Taylor's powers to Austin as he does, instead of her explaining her own powers that she's lived with for her whole life. Also, even though Michael only says she can reboot people, Austin already understands what that means, since he has basic computer using skills. And then he explains it to Michael. Honestly, I have to praise the realistic dialogue, and also question how these 14-year-olds are already getting started on mansplaining. In addition to throwing the fight between Michael and Corky, we find out that Taylor also threw the basketball game by rebooting the guy from the other team as he was throwing his free throws. And Austin is upset with her because she rigged a sports game, and that's not fair, which I think is a reasonable reason to be upset with Taylor, who has done a couple of questionable things like that by now. Anyway, it turns out Austin has come up with a name for the club. They are going to be called the Electro Clan. Yeah. Michael doesn't know what Electro Clan means, and Austin tries to explain what a clan is. He says, a clan is a group of people who all have the same, and then Taylor interrupts him, but I kind of want to know what he was going to say, because I'm not clear on what a clan means. It's like a group of people, or a family group to my understanding, so I don't know what Austin was going to say. They all start talking about their powers, and Austin announces that he has powers. Advanced intellectual powers. I can't complain. His intelligence is written like he has powers, so that's reasonable enough, honestly. But Taylor does complain. She gets tired of it, and she reboots Austin to shut him up. Great group dynamic already. Great use of powers by Taylor, as we've seen before. Nonetheless, many pages into this nonsense chapter, we finally get the first relevant piece of information that we're told, which is that Taylor asked her parents, and she was also born in Pasadena, at Pasadena General Hospital. She thought it was a weird coincidence, so she decided to do a little bit of research. She went online and she looked for the birth records for the days around her and Michael's birthdays, and weirdly enough, even though the hospital has the birth records for the last 42 years, they're missing 11 days around her and Michael's birthdays. Austin also says it's weird, reasonably, but then he says something about mutants, and Taylor doesn't like that he's using that word. I don't understand why she doesn't like it, because obviously he's using it in an X-Men kind of concept. And he's also wrong about them being mutants anyway, as we find out later. So it's a weird moment. Also, because Taylor doesn't like being called a mutant and Austin won't stop, Michael, instead of, asking his best friend to stop calmly, threatens to shock him. Very normal friend dynamic. And Austin is legitimately scared and thinks that Michael will probably actually do it, so he shuts up. We get the same "can you speak English" joke that I always see when there's an intelligent person in the room in bad media, where they say something slightly more complicated than it needs to be for no reason at all, and nobody else understands what they're talking about, and they're rude about it. But in this case, what Austin says is, "The county recorder's office will have vital statistics for," and then before he can say anything else, Taylor cuts him off. But what he means is the government also has birth records, so they can check those, presumably. They agree to meet again on Tuesday, which never comes up again, by the way. They meet sooner than that. And Michael says, "Then the first meeting of the Electro Clan is hereby adjourned until next Tuesday." They're weirdly formal about this whole thing, given that 2 of these 3 people probably were never in a club in their entire lives, from their general lack of popularity, at least. Michael tells Taylor he needs to call his mom for a ride home, and he tries to use her phone, but it doesn't work because he's electric. I don't think this comes up again in the series. It's just a weird detail, and I don't understand why phones just don't work around him specifically. It's confusing. Anyway, Taylor calls Michael's mom instead, and Michael's mom invites her over to Michael's birthday, which is weird, because I would think that Michael would be the one inviting her to his birthday, but I guess that's okay, so they can have another meeting during the birthday party, I guess. Austin tries to fist bump them goodbye, and Taylor says that she doesn't want to, and Michael admires her for not wanting to engage with Austin, and tries to remember how he can also not engage with Austin, like the wonderful friend that he is. Chapter 11, Birthday Wishes. This is yet another 2-page chapter in the middle of 2 very long chapters. Michael is 15 now, officially. For his birthday, he's going to the aquarium. I guess this is thematic, because they eventually go see electric eels, but it doesn't really match his personality at all. I don't know what he likes. None of us know what he likes, but it's like, apart from electric eels, he seems never to have had any interest in marine life. I don't know, it's just a weird choice. I would like to know more about his personality, so I could like to know what he might do for his birthday, but we never find out. To further prove that Michael doesn't have things that he likes, his birthday gift from his mom is a watch. It's a watch that his father used to own that she got engraved. Hi again, I'm moving out, hence missing books, missing posters, missing pins. Going great. Now is a great time to finally finish my thought from when I last recorded. Michael gets this watch that his dad had, that his mother has engraved. It would feel more natural to me if he'd previously had an interest in this kind of thing, but we'd never seen any particular interest in wristwatches. And at this point, we don't really know that much about his dad or what his dad meant to him. Another strange thing is that what she has it engraved with is, "I love you forever, Mom." So it's a watch of his dad's that has now become associated with his mother. I don't know. Like, it makes more sense in the real world, but in a story when you have a watch like this, it makes more sense to use it as a symbol for, I don't know, Michael missing his father, Michael caring about his mother, one or the other of them. In this case, the possible use of the watch as a symbol is completely shot in the foot, not only because it is now associated with both of his parents in pretty nondescript and generic ways, but also it never comes up in the story again. So, it's just useless. It's Richard Paul Evans remembering that he has to think of a birthday gift for Michael, and adding in this 2-page chapter probably later on, and then not knowing anything about Michael's personality and just coming up with something generic to show that he loves his parents, which is the one personality trait that we keep coming back to for him. We also do get a little bit of foreshadowing at the end of this chapter. I couldn't imagine a better gift. I wanted to tell her that she was the best mother in the world. I didn't. I should have. So, maybe something will happen to Michael's mom later. Yeah, okay. This chapter hasn't done a good job of making me attached to her, because previously in the scene where Michael confessed to shocking the bullies, she was just a very confusing character. It was like she turned into a completely different person in the middle of that scene, and so I really don't have a good grasp on who she is. Moving on. Chapter 12, The First Meeting. An absolutely perfect title, given that we've already had the first meeting, and we haven't had the second meeting yet, so I don't know what this is supposed to be. Austin shows up at Michael's door, as many of these chapters start. He attempts to start some conversation about the party, and then says Taylor is a babe. Okay. I don't know for sure, but this to me does not sound like the kind of language that a 14-year-old boy living in the 2000s or 2010s would use. It makes sense if he was saying that she was hot, or if she was a catch, or something along those lines. But babe just feels very 90s to me, in a way that doesn't really mesh with the rest of the setting of this book. We get a joke about body language. Austin says, I mean, she likes you. I read this book on body language, and I was watching her body. It's meant to be a joke. It's not a joke. It's not funny. It's creepy. He was staring at her. I think that was established because we're already very clear that Austin can't stop staring at any woman in the general vicinity. So why do we need Austin to continue to be creepy? I don't like that it's here. Why is it here? Austin wants to measure Michael's electricity again, I guess. And Austin notices that Michael is wearing a watch and asks him what it's made of, and Michael thinks it's silver, which means his mother probably either spent a lot of money on the watch individually or spent a lot of money getting engraved, which also makes me think that Michael's mom probably had to take it to a nice jewelry store and spend a lot of money getting it engraved, that it seems like she could have spent on something that was more meaningful to Michael personally. But that's just my philosophy on gift giving, and I don't know if that applies here, because once again, Michael's mom is supposed to be a lawyer who's working retail because she can't find a job in Idaho. So already the image is full of cracks, and I don't understand how I'm supposed to feel about the financial state of this family. Because Michael is wearing a watch on one wrist, Austin thinks that maybe it will corrupt the electrical readings of the multimeter, which shows an impressive lack of knowledge about how multimeters work, maybe even surpassing the bit where Austin thought that Michael had to clamp the things on his fingers. How am I supposed to believe that this guy is intelligent at all? Also, Austin knows that silver has high conductivity, and Michael doesn't seem to know that. And maybe it's a situation where I'm biased because of the field I'm in, but don't most people know that silver has high conductivity? Isn't that commonly known? Whatever, it's about to make even less sense. Austin does the reading, and it doesn't work, because it turns out Michael is too electric for the multimeter. The multimeter is saying error. It's supposed to go up to 1,000 volts, and so that apparently means that Michael is more than 1,000 volts of electricness. Which, let me remind you, it has been a week since the last measurement. 1 week. And Michael's electricity has increased by at least 15%, which is a lot for 1 week. Now, I actually did run the numbers a little bit on this. I thought about 2 different scenarios. One, that Michael has been linearly getting more electric for a little while. This means every day he gets the same amount of new volts. And according to that measurement, Michael would have had his electricity for a couple of months. He would have started getting electrical earlier that same year. So I figured that was probably not right, so I tried an exponential one where he gets the same percent more powerful every week and checked on that. And that does actually make more sense, assuming that Michael has only been getting electric for a year, that he started from 1 volt of electricity on his last birthday. And we know that's not true because of his stories about shocking people flat when he was a little kid. What is going on? How did Michael get 15% more electric in 1 week? It's an unrealistic amount of power growth that just doesn't make any sense unless there's something causing it. If Michael's powers are hinted at being related to his use of them or his awareness of them, this would make sense since he had to use them more recently to shock the bullies and to jumpstart his mother's car battery. But we don't get any indication of that at all throughout the book. So as I understand it, this mistake is not a failure to explain mistake, it's just a failure to understand numbers mistake, which is sadly common. And just because math is complicated doesn't mean that you can come up with something like this and not have it be intuitively, obviously wrong. Michael is not surprised that Taylor's cell phone didn't work, even though he didn't shock it. And Michael and Austin spend his birthday well playing video games. Finally, later on, Michael's mom and Taylor show up, and Michael suddenly realizes he hasn't gotten Taylor anything for her birthday, and he's very worried about this. We find out later that he has no idea what to get Taylor for her birthday, but thankfully, his mom has some ideas, and they're bad, so stay tuned for that. Once again, since Taylor is in the room, Austin can't function at all. She calls him Tex, apparently as a joke, and he doesn't react to her purposefully getting his name wrong for like the 3rd time. And we get a joke that Austin is not telling in this minute, but that apparently he tells occasionally, and that joke is, "I don't care what you call me as long as it's not late to dinner." That is, I'm familiar with this joke because my father makes this joke all the time. My father turned 60 this year, so wow, that does not mesh. It says Austin has given up on correcting everyone, even though he hadn't given up last time. And it's obvious that she's getting it wrong on purpose. Taylor and Michael's mom start making small talk. Michael's mom asks her about her last name, Ridley. And she says, "So Ridley's an interesting name." No, it's not. It's pretty common. And even though Taylor's name is pretty common, she knows what it means. It apparently means cleared woods in Old English, which that is pretty interesting for a last name, since it's just kind of like a word and not really a description of an occupation or a quality that someone had, which is usually where last names come from. That's what mine is like. And granted, I know what my last name means, but I didn't when I was 14. And it was something that I found out in passing by accident. I didn't go looking for it. And my last name is pretty common, just like Taylor's. So this is a bit of a weird moment to me. They continue to make small talk, but it is actually just Michael's mom interrogating Taylor. Thankfully, she has gotten Michael something other than the watch. She has cake. We do find out something new about Taylor, which is that she has 2 older brothers who are in college, so they aren't here, and it's kind of like being an only child, as she says. And I've had a thought, instead of just saying that Taylor has brothers who aren't around, which I think is to make it more realistic that all three of the main characters in this book are basically only children as far as the plot is concerned. Instead of just including this idea that Taylor has brothers, he could have actually written in the brothers. That way Taylor could have friends or some kind of connection to anybody in her life. She doesn't seem to be very close to her parents, she doesn't seem to be very close to her friends or her brothers. She says it's like being an only child, so she really must not think about them very much. And I know this feels like a nitpick right now, but that's just because we haven't had any scenes from Taylor's perspective yet, and seen how empty her personal life is. It's really telling when it's actually on display. They celebrate Michael's birthday, and Taylor tells this story, which is actually kind of funny, about how one of her cakes caught fire when she was a little kid. Small nitpick, it's Saturday when this chapter is going on, and when Michael's mom asks Taylor when her birthday is, she says Sunday and not tomorrow. Then Michael opens Taylor's gift, and his worries must be alleviated about not getting Taylor a gift yet, because wow, it's a terrible gift. Taylor got him a Meridian High hoodie. Michael says very tellingly, "It's awesome, period. Thanks, period." And then Austin immediately follows it with, "Cool, my birthday is in October." These are very real and normal people. Eventually, Michael's mom goes to bed, and as soon as she's out of the room, Austin once again says that she's a babe. And Taylor is completely on board with this weirdness. And Taylor says, "I hope I'm that hot when I'm a mom." I would believe this more if there had been any establishment from anyone other than Austin that Michael's mom is unusually attractive. But we don't actually see her interact with anyone outside her apartment, which is a problem unto itself. They start the first and a half meeting of the Electro Clan, and Austin and Taylor immediately decide that Michael should be the president because Taylor said so. It's not clear why they think he should be the president. I guess just because he's the character who has the least personality, and also the only one with powers that can be used on the offense. They start going over notes from the last club for some reason, even though that was 2 chapters ago, and for the characters that was yesterday, so it makes even less sense. But we do get some relevant information. Austin went and looked at the birth records, and he figured out some stuff. In the 11 days where the records had been missing from the hospital's database, he found them on the government database. There were 59 babies born. And somehow, in the birth records, he also found out more about those specific babies. And he found out that most of them didn't live for more than 2 days. And they start to think that's pretty weird. Only 17 of the babies survived. To convince them that this is weird, Austin starts doing stats and tells us it's a 4,200% increase in death during that 11-day period. You can tell from reading the rest of this bit that he did that math incorrectly, but I'm not going to get into that again. Austin says he'll do a little more research, and they finish up the meeting. So the party and the meeting are over, and now Austin and Taylor have to go back home. Austin lives in the same building, as I mentioned, but Taylor actually has to get picked up. Taylor's dad shows up and is in his cop car. I don't entirely know how police policy works, but do they get to drive cop cars when they're not on duty? We get a little conversation between Taylor's dad and Michael, and Taylor says this golden line, "When I'm old enough to date, he's going to be a nightmare," referring to her dad. Taylor is 15. She's 14 right now, but she's going to turn 15 the next day. Her parents will not let her be alone with a boy at all. She mentioned this a few chapters ago. What does she think is already happening? Finally, just as Taylor's about to leave, Michael invites her to his actual birthday party, which, since he's a loser, is just the same 2 people, except at the aquarium instead of at his apartment. And Taylor says yes. And Michael says happy birthday. and apparently this was Michael's best birthday ever, which is really astonishing to me. You can tell this boy has never had any friends. Chapter 13, Spiders. No chopsticks this time, just spiders. We get the worst chapter introduction so far. I've never cared much for Mondays. If I were the king of the world, I'd have Mondays removed from the calendar. Of course, the problem in that is that Tuesday would become the new Monday, which would defeat the purpose. Then again, if I were king of the world, I probably wouldn't hate Mondays. Notwithstanding, this was one Monday I was looking forward to. So we have skipped over Taylor's birthday. Michael has not sent her a birthday text or given her a birthday call or gone to visit her, which I guess partially makes sense since apparently he can't use phones. But he does want to think about giving her a birthday gift at his birthday party. So, because Taylor has just as much personality as he does, he decides to ask his mom for advice. I was thinking I should get her a present. Do you know what girls like? She smiled at me wryly. I should hope so. I'm a girl. I know. I mean one my age. Trust me, we're all the same. We like clothes and jewelry and flowers. I don't feel like I need to say anything in particular about that, because it really does speak for itself. The one thing that I will add is that when I was 14 and 15, I had to explicitly tell my relatives not to get me these things because I had no interest in them. Not only are these things a negative stereotype that a lot of people assume girls and young women will like, with no evidence to back this up. If Taylor does not like these things, it is extremely likely that she has repeatedly gotten them as gifts when she hasn't wanted them and is really sick of them. Come up with something else. And he does, because he's broke, so he just gets her an iTunes gift card. We skip to the next scene. Austin and Michael are at lunch, hanging out, and Austin has something to share, which he says is more important than food, which absolutely shocks Michael, because remember, Austin is fat and Michael hates his friend. They start arguing about who's going to go over and get Taylor from the table that she's at with all of her apparent friends, and eventually Michael gets drafted to do this. He comes up, asks to talk to Taylor about biology in private, which really sounds like a bad pickup line, which is probably why one of Taylor's friends says, "Woo!" And Taylor says, "Shut up, Katie," and comes over to figure out what Austin has to say. Just another indicator. All these people are bad friends. It's really kind of sad that that's all of their defining characteristic. Anyway, Austin had checked the birth records and found information he shouldn't have been able to find. So his next inclination was to check the newspaper. And he found a relevant article. He reads out this article, which is about a new machine, which is supposed to be an upgrade or like a different version of an MRI. It's called an MEI, magnetic electron induction, which is a weird acronym because MRI means magnetic resonance imagery. So you can tell, like, from the imagery part that there's some indication of what it does, but magnetic electron induction sounds like it could be any sci-fi device whatsoever and not necessarily used for medical imaging. This machine is very trustworthy, and we can know this because it's endorsed by Dr. John Smart from Harvard Medical School. I'm not making that up. That's the actual character's name who endorses this machine and never shows up again in the book series. We find out a little bit more about the machine. It's made by a company called Elgen, and the CEO is named C. James Hatch. And finally, the article ends by telling us that the machine has received FDA approval and is currently being installed in Pasadena General Hospital. And this article is from the very start of the 11-day period where all the babies died. Michael, Austin, and Taylor decide that this is weird and it couldn't have just been a coincidence. And because I'm petty, there's a little typo in this conversation. There's a missing period after Taylor says something. But Michael decides that the machine's waves must have traveled through the walls and specifically into the maternity ward and killed babies somehow. Austin starts thinking about this and realizes that these three have just put themselves in a very dangerous situation. They have found dirt. They have found not proof, but a very strong correlation that seems to indicate that this large and powerful company, Elgen, was involved with killing babies 15 years ago. That's serious dirt. And Austin starts to get worried about them being targeted by Elgen. He starts asking Taylor about something called spiders. Now, spiders, as Austin describes them, are programs that are intended to figure out who visits a certain website and dox them. I don't actually know much about spiders outside of the context of this book, so I don't know if there's a problem with that particular definition, but that's how it works. And of course, Richard Paul Evans doesn't use the word dox because I don't think he knows it. Then we get really bad news. Elgen has already found them because they used their spiders to find Taylor. On Saturday night, presumably after she got home from Michael's birthday party, which ended at least 9:15, so it was probably like at least 9:30 by the time whoever this was came over. On Saturday night, somebody came over and met with her parents and said that he was a representative of a school in Pasadena and that the school only selects 17 students a year and that she's been recommended by an anonymous source for entry to this school. Also that the school is really good and it means that she can go to whatever college she wants. And also they're offering her a full scholarship to this extremely good boarding school in Pasadena that only accepts 17 students a year. They're not even hiding it. Like, they know Taylor went and looked at the birth records. They know that she already has this association with Pasadena and that she's only been looking into it recently. So why are they being so open about this? They could have just said that, she received a scholarship to a prestigious boarding school that she's never heard of. They didn't have to include the detail about Pasadena. They didn't have to include the detail about only 17 students being admitted. This is really suspicious. And it's a weird enough coincidence that, if I was Taylor, I would immediately be thinking about how weird it was that I was being targeted by this company. Also, the school is just called the Elgen Academy. Like, it's just named after the company. It's called the Elgen Academy. And of course, she didn't know about Elgen at this time, but she immediately finds out about it, and it's clear that her friends were looking into it. So, this whole thing is weird. I don't know why she didn't bring it up beforehand. I don't know why Elgen are being so upfront about this obvious scheme to get Taylor silenced, but they are, and then immediately before they can talk about it more, Michael gets called to the front office of the school. Chapter 14, A Change of Plans. I walked to the front office about as enthusiastically as a man on his way to the electric chair. Michael, I thought you were electric. I thought it had already been established that you can't get hurt from being shocked. Okay, I don't know if that's been established yet, but it is a part of the magic system of this book. Michael can't get hurt from getting shocked. So this is a weird metaphor to use. Just say he feels like a death row prisoner. The electric chair hasn't been used for years and years anyway. So it's not something that I would think that Michael would think of, but that's just me. Anyway, Michael is scared of going to the front office because of previous bad experience with a corrupt principal, but now we find out that Jack and Jack's goons are in detention instead of Michael. So he doesn't need to be worried about that. We find out why Michael has actually been called to the front office. He has gotten the same prestigious fake scholarship that Taylor did. The scholarship is called the C.J. Hatch Scholarship, which means it's just named after the CEO of the company that runs the boarding school that also named it after itself, which just seems like an unnecessary level of transparency. Especially given that anyone who read the newspaper and knew about the birth records could find out that this was affiliated, and clearly Michael and his friends were on the path to doing that. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, there was a second article that was very, very brief at the end of the 11 days, which said that the machine was shutting down due to technical problems, which is why it was only that 11 days. Those were the 11 days that the machine was operating. Mr. Dahlstrom, the corrupt principal from before, is acting like he's heard of this fake boarding school, and he tries to bribe Michael, or at any rate, he admits to Michael that he has been bribed and then tries to guilt trip him, because apparently if Michael goes to this boarding school, Meridian High will get $200,000 in funding from a private company. Like, this is obviously fake. There's no way that a boarding school this prestigious would select 2 students from Meridian High and then offer to pay them $200,000 if the students go. If I heard that deal, I would go do basic research about this boarding school and find out it's not real. You know, you could do that. Or maybe Mr. Dahlstrom knows that and is just willing to take the bribe for the school. Or maybe he's being bribed for him. I don't know. It's not clear. I don't know why he tells Michael about the $200,000. It reflects poorly on him, and given how terrible of an experience Michael's had at Meridian High, he has no reason to want the school to get more funding. Michael gets back from the office, and Austin and Taylor are not in class. They seem to have cut class to wait for them, but he doesn't tell them that he also got the same offer until Taylor walks away, at which point he tells Austin. I guess he doesn't want to upset him, but also Taylor and Austin are very scared at this point, and Michael is probably even more scared because now he knows that this corporation is onto him too. And it just, like, this is the kind of situation where you need to be open with each other. Clearly, they've already cut class for this. I would suggest that they go home and talk to Michael's mother, because obviously she already knows what's going on, and she's also the only adult who knows about their powers. And maybe she would find a way to help them hide from this company. But they don't do that. They just pretend like everything is fine and keep going with their day. That's not going to stop Michael from enjoying his birthday party, after all. So yes, the rest of the school day happens, and they just think about how bad it is, and nothing happens. Michael and Austin and his mom go back to the school to pick up Taylor because her cheerleading practice goes on after the school day is over. They go into the gym and Taylor is not there, so Michael finds Taylor's friend and asks her where she is. Maddie, the friend, tells Michael that Taylor had a headache and had to leave practice early. She texts Taylor, and Taylor says that she's fine, but she has a headache and she's not feeling well. Michael and Austin buy this. Actually, there's a little bit here which could have been used to be clever, which is that when Taylor texts, she says, "I'm sorry I forgot to call," even though she knows that Michael can't use a phone and doesn't have a phone because he's electric. So she should know that there should be a problem with this. And Michael should notice that that doesn't sound like it's from her, but he doesn't notice. Because he's stupid. And because they've just been threatened by a giant powerful corporation today, and now Taylor is mysteriously sick and missing. I would be freaking out. I would call the cops. But Michael doesn't. Michael doesn't call the cops. Michael just thinks Taylor's probably sick. So with that very ominous and obviously bad chapter ender, we move on to chapter 15, The Man Who Wore Sunglasses at Night. Ooh, ominous. Hey, at least it's not. At least it's a slightly more illustrative chapter title than some of the ones we've been getting. Michael and Austin and Michael's mom go to the aquarium and get excited about the sharks and the electric eels. Michael shocks the electric eel tank and the eels like it. We get a little detail that is very interesting to me, maybe irrationally so. We find out that when Michael was 9, he used to write EEM, which stood for Electric Eel Man, on the corners of his papers, presumably his school papers. Adding letters to your signature or adding letters to papers that you write on as if they mean something secret is also a little detail in Model Land, which is one of those infamously bad books that breached containment, unlike this one. It was written by Tyra Banks, who was the showrunner, I believe, for America's Next Top Model. In that book, the main character writes FG on her signature, and it stands for Forget-A-Girl, because she's forgettable, I guess. She genuinely does have, like, a kind of effective invisibility that would be really interesting if she actually used it in the story. It's just seeing these two instances make me wonder if including little secret messages in your signature is something that people do and is just like an aspect of life that I missed. I don't know. Could be, could not be. Great minds think alike, but fools seldom differ. Michael and Austin and Michael's mom go to the pizza place, which is not called Pizza Max. It's actually called Max Purple Pig Pizza Parlor and Piano Pantry, which, as Michael says, is as dumb as it is long. They get pizza, and out of nowhere, Michael's mom starts asking about Taylor's parents, and we find out, we're reminded that Taylor's dad is a police officer and her mom works at a travel agency. And then Michael's mom immediately asks, "Still like your watch?" I don't understand how conversations work in this book. There's no natural flow of things. People just pick topics. Austin goes to the bathroom, and Michael takes this moment to tell his mom about the C.J. Hatch scholarship. And his mom hears the word Elgin and is immediately terrified, confirming that obviously she knows something about this. Michael picks up on that, and yet this scene still never comes up in the rest of the book. He still never wonders how his mother knows about the bad guys. But his mother decides that they need to leave the restaurant immediately, except she does stay to pay the bill, so it's not like a terrible danger. Their lives aren't in danger. It's slow enough that they have to wait for the bill, but fast enough that Austin forgets his jacket and has to run in to get it. This is convenient because, once again, it gets Austin out of a situation where he apparently shouldn't be there. So a guy shows up and starts robbing Michael and his mother at gunpoint. Not what you expected, huh? Well, it's going to turn into what you expected. It's just it's starting with a non sequitur first. So actually it starts with even more of a non sequitur because he asks Michael's mother if she has money, and then once she has her wallet out, tries to rob her at gunpoint. And he takes her purse and asks Michael to hand him the car keys so he can also steal their car. And obviously, because the key ring is metal, Michael hands them to him and shocks him hard enough that he passes out. Yes, Michael did tase a guy unconscious. Because he's just unconscious and it happened so quickly, Michael doesn't know whether he's still alive. He could very well have killed that guy with the voltage that he was using. And he does have enough control over his powers to at least be able to pick what general range of voltage he can use, as we've seen so far. So why did he feel the need to almost kill the guy? He could have just partially incapacitated him. I don't know. I don't like Michael's morality. I don't like him as a character. All the characters in this book do terrible things, and I feel like it should be remarked on more. And obviously, this was partially in self-defense. Still, it did not need to be that violent. The mugger is unconscious, so now finally the real bad guy appears. He is wearing a suit and wearing sunglasses at night. He is obviously a rich guy. Finally, because once again, Michael's mother knows the bad guys, like I've said many times, and Michael doesn't seem to pick up on, we find out what Michael's mom's name is. There's a reason I've been calling her that, because her name is not included in this book except in this one scene. Her name is Sharon, which is a waste of a reveal. If you're going to wait that long to reveal it, it should be something more interesting than Sharon. We finally realize something relevant about Michael's powers. He's very angry, and because of that, there's electricity arcing between his fingers. And it's blue, which is weird, because when he shocked the guy one page ago, it was yellow electricity. So I don't know what the color theming is here. Michael is just realizing that his electrical powers are probably connected to emotion, and the man goes ahead and confirms, yes, your powers are linked to emotion, and he knows this already. Michael's mom tries to get her to go, but Michael doesn't go. He just stays there, and the bad guy introduces him to two other electric children. There is Zeus, and there is Nichelle. Zeus has long, greasy hair, which will come up later, and a chest tattoo of a lightning bolt. Nichelle is a goth. I actually kind of like the description here because it paints a pretty good image of both of them as they're introduced, and because the way that they look says a lot about their relative characters. Both of them look about Michael's age, which makes sense because these are also kids who were born in the same 11-day period at Pasadena General Hospital. They attack! But these are not good guys. Zeus shocks Michael's mom with lightning. Like, he isn't touching her, he shocks her with blue lightning from a distance. This is his power. Nichelle slowly walks toward Michael, not seeming to do anything in particular. He feels weaker, he gets a headache, he passes out. We'll get more on her powers later. Austin seems to show up. Michael's mom says something, but he can't hear her because his brain stops functioning, but it looks like she says, "I love you." I thought Zeus shocked her unconscious. Whatever. And that's chapter 15. Chapter 16, Gone. This is another 2-page chapter. Michael wakes up in the hospital. It turns out he'd passed out, and paramedics had found him, and they thought that he had a stroke. There is not and will never be any evidence for this, and it's never brought up again. But it's a weird assumption to make for someone who seemed to have just been unconscious. Michael's mom has been kidnapped. She was gone. When Austin came out of the pizza place, apparently the bad guys took her. And they did not take Michael. And it's not clear why they didn't. It's kind of implied later on that they took Michael's mom first, and then they didn't have enough time to take Michael because Austin had shown up, and presumably he was going to go get help, so they just kind of drove away. But that isn't entirely confirmed, and also, given that both Michael's mom and him were basically unconscious, why didn't they just take Michael first, since he's clearly the more valuable person here? Like, the bad guys know Michael's mom, but not in kind of a, like, we have a history way. They just knew each other, and then she ran away with Michael. So it's convenience. It's all convenience. We find out later that the bad guy who kidnapped Michael's mom, his sunglasses allow him to see electric children from miles away, which is why he knew that they were in the parking lot of the pizza place in the first place and went there to try and kidnap them. But if you just remove that plot point and you have maybe the bad guys breaking into Michael's mom's apartment to kidnap her, and they don't realize he's home and he manages to hide somewhere and watch the whole thing, that accomplishes the same thing. You can even have him also passing out and waking up in the hospital if Nichelle doesn't realize she's using her powers, which the way that all these kids' powers work, that's totally reasonable. The entire situation is obviously very contrived. But it's over now, and only the outcome matters. Michael's mother has been kidnapped, but he is fine. And he says he's upset about his mother being gone, and his body's pain is nothing compared to the agony he now felt. And this is good, because it reinforces Michael's singular personality trait of loving his mom. Chapter 17, Lieutenant Lloyd. The police show up to interview Michael because his mom is obviously involved in an ongoing case. But it's the Boise police, even though Michael and his mom live in Meridian. And the pizza place was probably in Meridian. So what's up with that? Michael starts getting interviewed by this guy called Lieutenant Lloyd. And Michael still has Tourette syndrome. It hasn't disappeared yet, which is good. But ticking, as in he's having tics, is spelled with a K, so I don't know what that's about. Lloyd starts interviewing him, and Michael tells them all about being mugged, but nothing after that. He mentions that there was a man with a boy and a girl about his age who looked rich, and that he fainted. And the police say, fear will do that. Which, no, fear will not do that. The paramedics thought he had a stroke. I thought... Why did that disappear? It's been one chapter. Apparently they have interviewed the mugger as well, who was just unconscious and did survive. His name is Clyde Stewart. And apparently the police think that there was someone behind Clive Stewart. And they're trying to interrogate him, but so far they haven't found anything, but it's okay, because Lieutenant Lloyd says, I've still got a few tricks up my sleeve, which is really goddamn sinister. And then we find out that the gun that the mugger had, Stewart's gun, it was empty. The entire thing was fake, just so that the bad guy could watch Michael shock somebody. That was actually the point of it. But God, this poor guy. There were actually also little details in the mugging scene that showed that he was being very scared and forced into doing it. So I feel bad for the character. Michael does not, because we know how Michael's morality works. The police leave, Austin comes in, and Michael tells him actually everything and doesn't leave out any details this time. And that's part one. Part one of this book is over. They end it by saying, at least Taylor's safe, even though he hasn't heard from her in days. Chapter 18, Kidnapped. This is the beginning of a whole series of chapters throughout the book that are written in third person instead of first person, and that generally follow Taylor. There are some that follow the bad guys, but most of them are about Taylor. And I have thoughts on this. It's my feeling that even if you're writing a first-person book, it's generally a good idea to break out of that first person in a while. Maybe give a couple of interludes that show what the bad guys are up to, or that give the reader a hint of something else that's going on in the world that the prospective character doesn't know about yet. That can be really helpful. The difference here is that maybe a third or half of this book is written in third person, which means Taylor is basically a second protagonist, but we don't really get to see as much of her perspective as we do of Michael's. It would have been interesting if first person was also used for Taylor. It's not necessary, but I think it would have been better. Then again, Richard Paul Evans obviously knows nothing about women, so maybe it would have been way worse. I can't know for sure. To finally answer the question that we've had for several chapters as Taylor's friends continue to not worry about her, Taylor has been kidnapped. She's in a van. She's feeling sick to her stomach. And no, I am not immune to typos. I seem to have spelled sick with an H in my notes. We get a recap of what actually happened. Taylor did have a headache during cheerleading practice, and so she decided to go take a walk to clear her head a little bit. She saw a scary girl, and this scary girl turns out to be Nichelle, the same one who made Michael pass out mysteriously. Michael didn't parse Nichelle as scary. He didn't really mention anything about her other than that she's a goth, and we find out from Taylor that she's wearing a dog collar. Nichelle is scary in how depraved she is, but at this point Taylor has just seen her, and she looks like a dork, so I can't imagine her being particularly scary, but that's just my opinion. Then a van pulled up, and Nichelle was suddenly inside of the van instead of following her, which is never explained, and Taylor gets really dizzy. Taylor has successfully been kidnapped. They blindfold her and tie her up and put something over her mouth and nose, so they knocked her out as well. This is kind of dark, as you can see. So, back to the present. Taylor is awake and aware, still tied up, and she's in the van with a couple of men. One of them is the driver. It said that there were multiple men. It said there were 2 men, but I don't know who the other man is. And Nichelle is there. Nichelle is shorter than Taylor, further confirming why she shouldn't look scary. Taylor keeps trying to reboot the van driver. She's been trying this for a while because she thinks that a crash would maybe get people to notice that she's been kidnapped and is being held inside this van. But it doesn't work. Every time she tries to reboot the van driver, it hurts a little bit, and nothing changes. So we finally find out about Nichelle's powers. Nichelle is, by her own description, an electrical vampire, Taylor's worst nightmare. And how this works is that she can feed off other people's powers, stop them from using their powers, and also cause them mental pain somehow. She's a power sink. Having their powers taken away makes the electric children sick. Somehow, this also means that Nichelle can inflict pain very specifically as well, although that's not explained. Basically, she can torture them and also take their powers away. That's the only thing you need to know. And yes, Nichelle starts torturing Taylor. She causes her pain, tells Taylor that they're going to study her in a lab and dissect her, and forces Taylor to start calling her master. And because Taylor is a doormat, she just does everything that Nichelle asks her to without even having any defiant thoughts. Like, probably if I was in the same situation, I would do the same thing just to get this psychopath to stop torturing me. But also, I would be furious inside, and we get no indication of this, which is just another reason why I would like this more if it was first person. But Taylor is just very scared at this point and not at all angry. Nichelle has not been instructed to do this, by the way. Nobody has asked her to do this. In fact, the people up front start telling her to stop. She just likes torturing people. She's just a psychopath. We finally get a good piece of information, which is that the people who have powers, the electric children, the ones who did not die in those 11 days where the machine was going, they're called glows. This is good. It's a distinctive name. It's already been established that they have very faint glows in the dark, and that apart from the electrical nature of their powers, is the only thing that all of them have in common, except Nichelle, but that's not important. I like the name Glows. Unfortunately, because the villain uses the name Glows, Michael and his whole group, going forward in this series, refuse to. They continue to call the Glows Electric Children, which is fine, but nobody who's 15 calls themselves a child. It's unrealistic, and I don't understand why they do it when Glows is right here and is a perfectly good reason to stop calling themselves children, but they don't take it. But that's a whole problem later on, so let's get back to the actual point here. Taylor finds out that Michael's mom has also been captured. Both Taylor and Michael's mom were kidnapped on Monday. Taylor at about 5 o'clock, Michael's mom at like 8, I don't know. And Nichelle was involved with both of them. She was in both vans. So my question is Mrs. Vey tied up in the trunk? Or do they have 2 vans? And I think probably they have 2 vans, because also Hatch, the main bad guy, the guy who looked rich, and Zeus are not here. They've gone somewhere. So presumably there's 2 vans, or maybe because he looks rich, he has a helicopter or something. I'm just confused how Nichelle could have been at the other kidnapping. Where did they take Taylor during that? It seems like they only trust Nichelle to guard her, so what was going on? Was Taylor in the van when they were kidnapping Michael's mother, and then they moved Michael's mother later? It seems like a logistical issue that they don't really address, and I am curious about it, genuinely. Taylor actually does something clever. She leans her head against the metal wall of the van, and Nichelle is doing the same thing. And Taylor uses the connection of metal between them to read Nichelle's mind. And here's what she sees. She saw images of the school from the brochure. She saw other youths her age, some of them well-dressed and laughing, and she knew Nichelle hated these kids. She saw something she didn't understand. She saw herself at the school, interacting with the other students, as if it had already happened. Was she seeing the future? Then she saw other youths lying on the ground, some in pain, others crying in a dark place that looked like a dungeon. She sat back up, unable to continue. Everything she saw in Nichelle's mind terrified her. Then we get a chapter break, for no reason, as far as I can tell. Chapter 19, Taylor's Arrival. They show up at the building complex in Pasadena, so clearly it has been like a day. The guards take her inside and to an exam room where she gets given a checkup by Dr. Parker, who's the doctor. Dr. Parker is a kind of minor character, but I think she does show up later. Nichelle threatens to continue torturing Taylor if she doesn't cooperate, so Taylor does everything. And it is basically just a routine exam. They have her take her clothes off for some reason. I don't think they explain why. Taylor steps on a scale, and then some other non-specific stuff happens. And then we find out that the electric children have a secondary pulse. Actually, it's more like an EKG. What do you mean? Actually, it's more like an EKG. An EKG is not a type of pulse. It's the machine that they use to record your regular pulse. I am so baffled. I don't have the faintest idea what Evans was trying to go for here. They have a secondary pulse that's like an EKG. What? The scientific illiteracy is truly impressive, and the refusal to even Google these concepts to find out what they mean is absolutely insane. But we do get a little bit more information here, because apparently Taylor's readings are exactly like her sisters. The doctor has Taylor put on a jumpsuit and then asks Nichelle to take her to her cell. Chapter 20, A Surprise Visit. We got back to Michael, who's staying with Austin's family now because a social worker is fine with it for the time being, as it's said. Except no, he's not. He's actually just staying in his own apartment down the hall and telling the social worker and presumably the police that he's staying with Austin. Austin's mom gives him red vines and tells him she's there if he needs her. Michael looks at his mom's watch and feels sad and then starts crying. And I think this is genuinely good. Or at least, at the very least, if it wasn't badly written, it's good that he's so emotionally affected by his mother's disappearance, because this is something that has been firmly established in the book, and now it's actually getting paid off. Michael really cares about his mother. She's basically the only adult in his life that really supports him in a meaningful way. Maybe Austin's mom, but not really. And having this kind of a reaction to thinking that he may have lost her is good. Not everything about this book is bad. I am proud of Richard Paul Evans for admitting that Michael would be crying in this situation, because I think that's realistic. We do get a weird line, though, when Michael is originally about to go into his apartment, and Austin asks if he wants him to come, and Michael says no, and Austin says, "I understand." And we're told that, like, this is a supreme virtue, but we've never seen Austin exhibiting any kind of empathy for anyone before, so it kind of comes out of left field. There's a knock on the door, and Taylor's parents are here. And Taylor's parents tell Michael what's going on. They tell him, at least, that Taylor ran away and keeps texting them saying that she hates them, to, I guess, confirm this. They're very upset. In fact, they looked very upset. Taylor's dad is a cop, and he doesn't question that maybe these texts aren't from Taylor. Whoever does have Taylor's phone right now, which we don't find out, it's like one of the bad guys. Whoever has Taylor's phone right now is not doing a very good job. We already saw that in the inconsistency with Taylor saying that she forgot to call when she texted Michael. Maddie, that is. There are probably other inconsistencies that are in these texts that she's sending to her parents, especially since it seems like they are continuously sending texts. The more they do that, the more likely that her parents will notice that something is amiss. And her dad should have, like, the basic critical thinking skills at least. Hey, there was a kidnapping in this area recently, and it was actually my daughter's friend's mom. I wonder if her going missing has anything to do with that. They don't question it at all. So one of the texts that this fake Taylor has sent is, "Tell Michael I'll see him soon," which is why they came to see him in the first place, because they thought maybe he knew where she was. When he doesn't recognize this, once again, another reason for them to be suspicious. So the Ridleys leave, and Michael immediately goes to tell Austin that Taylor has also been kidnapped. Finally, like 7 chapters later, getting this message through to our main characters that was obvious from the start. Yeah. Chapter 21, Dr. Hatch and the Twin. Taylor's in a cell, and there's no metal in it. It's made of pencil erasers. I'm not making that up. There's anything she'd need. There's a bed, there's a bathroom, there's restraining straps on the bed. They're obviously surveilling her. There's like cameras and stuff like that. But Taylor is upset that she doesn't have a thermostat, even though she's been kidnapped. Here's the paragraph. "The room was lit by fluorescent lighting, concealed behind thick plastic plates. There was neither a thermostat nor switches in the room of any kind, and she had no control over light, heat, or air. The people watching her from the cameras would decide when she would have lights and how hot or cold she would be. She had no control over anything. So naturally, Taylor's next priority, after being upset about the thermostat issues, is being worried about missing cheerleading. She wasn't even sure what day it was. Mrs. Shaw would be furious with her for missing cheer. And then she's too afraid to laugh at how stupid that is. She thinks about how bad she feels for arguing with her parents recently, and then the door opens with a metallic click. I thought there wasn't any metal in this room. I thought that was the point. What? There's metal in the door? What? Sorry? Okay. Nichelle is there, with the man who wore sunglasses at night, and we know this because he's now wearing sunglasses inside. This is Dr. Hatch, who's the main bad guy. He's also the CEO of the company, and has been for 15 years, and probably didn't turn evil given how big corporations act, but has been assigned to the childcare duties of this company. It's weird the things that Hatch does himself in this universe. You would think that he would be in charge of the company and then that he would have his lackeys interact with the children. But he does all of that himself. So I'll talk more about that later. Nichelle is with the man, and Taylor doesn't say hello back, so Nichelle starts torturing her, and the man kicks her out. Hatch kicks her out. We find out she doesn't have any friends, which makes sense. I wonder why. Hatch starts talking about Taylor's dad and explains that they've been sending him fake texts, and Taylor's dad's name is Dean, and he also works for the Boise police. And I guess that makes sense. He still lives in Meridian, like we know that, but I guess he doesn't work there. Yeah, there are a decent number of people who live in Meridian and work in Boise, so I guess that makes sense, but still, okay. We get confirmation that his sunglasses are spotting glows, and that he can see a glow from 1.7 miles away. And on page 138, we've just been introduced to this guy. We get his full villain motivation. He wants to change society. Throw the past out and start fresh, is how he phrases it. And he wants to do that by creating a race of superior beings. So everyone has electric powers, and he's sure that if everyone in the world has electric powers where they can shock somebody with a touch, that every other problem will be fixed somehow. Also, I've seen this kind of like superpower elitism in media before, but it makes so much less sense when the person who's saying it doesn't have superpowers. Hatch is a normal human. He doesn't have powers. All he has is money and his one pair of magic sunglasses. The villain motivation is evil, but it's not really believable. You can't really tell how he got to this point, because as a businessman, it's not really clear how he's planning to profit off this. Also, it's a really big thing to tell Taylor immediately. Like, if you're trying to indoctrinate someone, you should do it slowly and make sure they have trust in you before you reveal something that ridiculous. Don't try and indoctrinate people, obviously, but if you are doing it, or if you are writing it in fiction, don't do it like this. It doesn't work. And no, it doesn't end up working, obviously. Hatch barely lets Taylor talk, but the first thing that she gets in that he doesn't like is she says, "You killed all those babies." And Hatch follows up with this brilliant logic. "I didn't. The machine did. Accidentally. Accidents with machines happen every day, don't they? Let's keep things in perspective, Taylor. During that time frame, more babies died in car accidents on the California roads than were harmed by our machine. But you don't hear an outcry about that, do you? You don't accuse the car salesman or automotive engineers of being mass murderers, do you? Of course not. Accidents are the price of civilization. Blood oils social progress. Sure, it was awful, but was it worth it? Believe me, it was. He looked carefully into her eyes to see if she was buying his argument. He decided she wasn't. Still, it was unfortunate, and that's where you can help us, and help save the lives of future babies. Would you like to help save babies' lives, Taylor? And then, even though it's a complete non sequitur, she has to say yes, because any other answer would make her seem morally depraved in front of him, even though that's what he wants. He basically wants to turn her into Nichelle. That's like his ultimate goal, but it doesn't work. But next, we finally do find out why he's so excited about finding Taylor specifically. And this is because Taylor has a twin sister, which, you know, has been hinted a couple times at this point, but this is the confirmation where he confirms it and Taylor says she isn't. And then he produces the twin sister to prove it to her. But Hatch thinks twin studies in science are cool, and he wants to try one with her and her sister. But he isn't going to hurt them or anything. All the stuff about that dissecting them was probably fake, because that never happens. But he just wants to study how their powers are different. Taylor's sister's name is Tara. Lots of characters in this series have T names. You haven't been introduced to some of them yet, but I can promise that there are several of them. Tara has been here at the academy, as they call it, for 9 years. But since Taylor was adopted to a different state, she was adopted from California to Idaho, suddenly, magically, she became completely impossible to find. Like, they lost track of her somehow, because adoption records are hard, even though Austin went and looked up birth records and was able to find them really easily. And you would think that they would at least be able to find her through an internet search or school records and wouldn't necessarily feel the need to use spiders, but I don't know, it doesn't make sense. You know the bit in the prologue with the chopstick in China? Okay, if you didn't like that analogy, Richard Paul Evans has another one. You vanished like a grain of rice in a rice paddy. Anyway, we do get confirmation that it was because a spider noticed Taylor looking up the birth records. I don't know if that's the right terminology for a situation like this, but that's what happened. The spider found Taylor, and through her, he found Michael. And Hatch is pretty confident that he no longer has to do anything about Michael, and that Michael will now come to Pasadena himself, despite the fact that he's 15, and that is actually over the legal age in Idaho where you're allowed to learn how to drive. But Michael hasn't started learning yet, and presumably Hatch knows that. So I don't know how Hatch expects Michael to get to Pasadena, but he does. He's certain that Michael is going to come to Pasadena, and Hatch doesn't need to do anything about it. Anyway, Tara starts talking. She starts going on about how nice it is to be cool and rich and privileged. That this is very much a theme of her character. Tara starts bragging about a diamond watch, and Hatch dismisses her. And as soon as she's out the door, Hatch says, "Beautiful girl," and then leans in to tell Taylor stuff that he doesn't need to lean in to tell her. So he's admiring 15-year-old girls. I don't like it. The news he tells Taylor is a bit dark. They're going to run some tests to make sure she's okay, and then this is going to be her family forever, for the rest of her life. And that, my friends, is the end of part 2. Did you think part 2 was going to be the same length as part 1? Yeah, that's a nice idea. Unfortunately, Evans has never heard of consistency. This book has 4 parts, so I think I'm going to cap it off there. I'd like to do another video doing parts 3 and 4, but point of fact is that recording this has been a bit tiring, and I'm also moving right now, so pretty soon, in just a few days, I'm going to be in a space where I can't really get the chance to record, which is unfortunate, but it does give me the chance to work on some other things and to maybe work on scripting a new video. My next video is not going to be parts 3 and 4 of Michael Vey, though I do plan to make that eventually, because there is so much more nonsense in this book that I'd love to share with you. Instead, I'd really like to make something about one of the video games I like. And this is for a couple different reasons. First off, I can start working on my visual editing skills and have to record some footage myself. It's not just me sitting in front of my smug bookshelf and ranting about something. And also, if I'm in a situation where I just have to do audio recordings, that means I'm not as limited by the upcoming move. Also, I just want a little bit of a breather, and there's a lot of things I'd really love to talk about. Thing is, even though I'd love to talk about a video game, I don't know which one, so I'm gonna let you guys choose. I have 4 options: Celeste, Hollow Knight, the Room series, or Gorogoa. These are some of my favorite games out there, and they've really inspired me to try making things that I haven't tried before. For the last 3 games on the list, I think it would be really cool to do lore summaries or analyses of the games. Whereas for Celeste, I'd like to go over some Easter eggs or maybe talk about some of the music that I think is really well done and integrated with the story. So go ahead and tell me in the comments below what you'd like me to talk about. If you got through this entire video, congratulations, because this was ridiculous for me. I can't imagine what it'll be like to edit. Hopefully, by the time this gets to you, it's a hell of a lot more palatable than this terrible book.